You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Mueller Report. We're reading from page 131. This is under the title of Paul Manafort's Ties to Russia and Ukraine and the subtitle of Oleg Deripaska Consulting Work. In 2017, Deripaska invested through another entity in Pericles Emerging Market Partners, LP, also known as Pericles, an investment fund created by Manafort and former Manafort business partner Richard Davis. The Pericles Fund was established to pursue investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. Gates stated in interviews with the office that the venture led to a deterioration of the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska. In particular, when the fund failed, litigation between Manafort and Deripaska ensued. Gates stated that by 2009, Manafort's business relationship with Deripaska had, quote, dried up. According to Gates, various interactions with Deripaska and his intermediaries over the past few years have involved trying to resolve the legal dispute. As described below, in 2016, Manafort, Gates, Kalimnik, and others engaged in efforts to revive the Deripaska relationship and resolve the litigation. Political consulting work. Through Deripaska, Manafort was introduced to Ronit Akhmenatov, a Ukrainian oligarch who hired Manafort as a political consultant. In 2005, Akhmenatov hired Manafort to engage in political work supporting the Party of Regions, a political party in Ukraine that was generally understood to align with Russia. Manafort assisted the Party of Regions in regaining power, and its candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, won the presidency in 2010. Manafort became a close and trusted political advisor to Yanukovych during his time as president of Ukraine. Yanukovych served in that role until 2014 when he fled to Russia amidst popular protests. Konstantin Kalimnik. Kalimnik is a Russian national who has lived in both Russia and Ukraine and was a longtime Manafort employee. Kalimnik had direct and close access to Yanukovych and his senior entourage, and he facilitated communications between Manafort and his clients, including Yanukovych and multiple Ukrainian oligarchs. Kalimnik also maintained a relationship with Deripaska's deputy, Viktor Boyarkin, a Russian national who previously served in the defense attaché office of the Russian embassy to the United States. Manafort told the Mueller prosecutor's office that he did not believe Kalimnik was working as a Russian spy. The FBI, however, assesses that Kalimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. Several pieces of the office's evidence, including witness interviews and emails obtained through court-authorized search warrants, support that assessment. And then there's a series of bullet points here. 1. Kalimnik was born on April 27, 1970, in Oblast, then of the Soviet Union, and attended the Military Institute of the Ministry of Defense from 87 till 1992. Sam Patton, a business partner to Kalimnik, stated that Kalimnik told him he was a translator in the Russian army for 7 years, and that he later worked in the Russian armament industry selling arms and military equipment. U.S. government visa records, another bullet point, revealed that Kalimnik obtained a visa to travel to the United States with a Russian diplomatic passport in 1997. Another bullet. Kalimnik worked with the International Republican Institute's, IRI, Moscow office, where he did translation work and generally office management from 1998 to 2005. While another official recalled the incident differently, one former associate of Kalimnik's at IRI told the FBI that Kalimnik was fired from his post because his links to Russian intelligence were too strong. That same individual stated that it was well known that at IRI that Kalimnik had links to the Russian government. Another bullet. Jonathan Hawker, a British national who is a public relations consultant at FTI Consulting, worked with DMI on a public relations campaign for Yanukovych. After Hawker's work for DMI ended, Kilimnik contacted Hawker about working for a Russian government entity on a public relations project that would promote in Western and Ukrainian media Russia's position on its 2014 invasion of Crimea. In the last bullet point, Gates suspected that Kilimnik was a spy, a view that he shared with Manafort, Hawker, and Alexander Vanderswan, an attorney who had worked with DMI on a report for the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The next paragraph has been deleted by Bill Barr. B, contacts during Paul Manafort's time with the Trump campaign. Subset, Paul Manafort joins the campaign. Manafort served on the Trump campaign from late March to August 19, 2016. On March 29, 2016, the campaign announced that Manafort would serve as the campaign's convention manager. On May 19, 2016, Manafort was promoted to campaign chairman and chief strategist, and Gates, who had been assisting Manafort on the campaign, was appointed deputy campaign chairman. Thomas Barak and Roger Stone both recommended Manafort to candidate Trump. In early 2016, at Manafort's request, Barak suggested to Trump that Manafort join the campaign to manage the Republican convention. Stone had worked with Manafort from approximately 1980 until the mid-1990s through various consulting and lobbying firms. Manafort met Trump in 1982 when Trump hired the Black Manafort, Stone and Kelly lobbying firm. Over the years, Manafort saw Trump at political and social events in New York City and at Stone's wedding, and Trump requested VIP status at the 1998 and 1996 Republican conventions worked by Manafort. That's interesting. The 1988 convention and 96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you back home in Portland, Oregon, in our studio here, and so glad to be back home here with Sean and Nate and Joyce and Louise and then out there in the world, Sue and Nigel and everybody else. It's great to be back. So a lot that we're going to cover today, and a lot that I'd like to involve you in the conversation about. We have no guests. I'm just going to be going off on riffs and rants and whatnot all day long. I want to start out with this question. You know, when the economy crashes, and we just entered the longest expansionary phase in the history of the United States, literally going back to the George Washington administration. And I have been saying since 2016, I was predicting that the economy would crash in 2016, and it turns out that 2016 was, in fact, the year that the economy stopped growing, except for debt. And so what's been happening since 2016, 3 years now, and really in some ways since 2015, maybe 4 years, is that the only growth that's happening in the economy has been happening because either government is borrowing money. Trump borrowed $1.5 trillion, for example. I mean, we're at $22 trillion in our national debt now, which is pretty huge. It's about the same size as our annual GDP, maybe even a little larger. Number one, government borrowing. Number two, corporate borrowing. Corporate borrowing is at an all-time high. And number three, individual borrowing, or family borrowing, which is at an all-time high. And all of these numbers now, as a percentage of the economy, you can't compare dollars to dollars, but basically relative to where we were in 1929, the last time there was a major crash, we hit 1929 style numbers about 2 years ago, and we are now in the overshoot of that. And, this isn't just some speculative question. And so that's my first question is, do you think that America is going to move to the hard right when the economy crashes? Are we going to move to the FDR left, or are we going to move to the corporate oligarchy middle? The thing that we didn't have in the 1930s, which brought us FDR progressivism, FDR literally saying the government will be the employer of last resort. If you can't get a job, the government will provide you with a job. If you lose your job, the government will provide you with health insurance, or excuse me, with unemployment insurance. If you are old and poor, this is Social Security, of course, the government will provide you with a stipend on which you can live. Basically, FDR, I think, sometimes referred to it as a pension, essentially, because everybody understood what a pension was. So what we didn't have then that we do have now is a corporate media that, persists in putting its thumb on the scale. It's just constantly, that wants to see politics done as sports and doesn't really want any kind of a serious discussion about issues. It's, did Kamala Harris knock Joe Biden upside the head? Well, what does that have to do with the issues? Right? Let's talk about the issue. She raised the issue of busing. He raised the issue of busing. So let's have a conversation about race in America. No, the media doesn't want to do that. Although Fareed Zakaria's program on CNN last night, and I'm sorry I only missed the last part of it because I just got back, flying back from Minnesota. But the last 15, 20 minutes of it was pretty shocking. And, did you see Fareed Zakaria's show? I'm curious your thoughts on that. But frankly, the thing that concerns me is that, we had an FDR left in the United States from 1932 through the end of the Johnson administration. And in a way, Jimmy Carter, the Jimmy Carter presidency was still singing the songs of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal and the Great Society. Although in the last 2 years of his presidency, he did start some massive deregulation in response to high inflation and a soft economy. I think he thought that this might work. It had been sold for years and years and years by the right-wing think tanks. But now we have this kind of corporate oligarchy. Well, we do have a corporate oligarchy. This was brought to us by the Supreme Court, the Buckley decision in '76, the Bellotti decision in '78, Citizens United in 2010, McCutcheon in 2013, as I recall. And what all of these decisions basically did was say, dark money can just pour into our politics, whether it's lobbying, whether it's campaigning specifically for a candidate, whether it's going after ballot issues. For example, last year, or 2 years ago rather, Washington State had a carbon tax on their ballot. It had widespread support across the state. When it first got on the ballot, it was a very modest carbon tax. It wasn't going to affect individuals all that much, and in fact, it would have recycled money back to individuals. But then the fossil fuel industry came in and spent tens of millions of dollars. Virtually, I could not watch a program on television. Being here in Portland, we're in both the Portland and the Vancouver, Washington State markets. And Vancouver's, one of the major cities, one of the probably 5 or 6 major cities in Washington State. And so we were seeing, we see the ads that are directed at Washington State here in Portland. And every single show had this former Republican Secretary of State who looked like Mr. Rogers and talked like Mr. Rogers. He seems like such a nice guy. And he never identified himself as a Republican. He said, I'm the former Secretary of State. And I just wanted to tell you that this carbon tax will destroy our economy. It'll destroy you. It'll destroy the American middle class. It's going to ruin the economy. These are not his exact quotes, but this was the essence of what he was saying. And sure enough, after the fossil fuel industry spent tens of millions of dollars on this thing, and the people who wanted the carbon tax were just average people. They didn't have money to buy for advertising. The carbon tax went down in flames. And then you see Chuck Todd, interviewing Jay Inslee, who was the governor of Washington State at the time, saying, well, your carbon tax in Washington State didn't work out, and that's the state you run. If you couldn't do it in your own state, how can you do it anywhere else? Without pointing out that it was millions and millions and millions, basically a wall-to-wall media blitz by the fossil fuel industry in Washington State that took this thing down. Well, Chuck Todd's never going to point that out, and neither is anybody else in the media. So might we end up with kind of a corporate middle, which is sort of what we had during the last 2 Democratic presidential administrations? Or are we going to go hard right like we did with Reagan and like we did with Bush and Trump, I guess the middle also would be the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. He actually raised taxes and did cap and trade to get rid of acid rain. I mean, George Bush the elder was an old-fashioned Republican, the last of them. They're gone. Which is sort of like the new, the 1992 version of the New Democrats and the new Democratic coalition right now. And the Blue Dogs. I mean, you've got these Blue Dog Democrats who are really increasingly the tail that wags the Democratic Party. And they're all pushing for basically corporate oligarchy controlling our political machine. So which direction do you think we're going? Question number 2 for this hour. Which candidate are you supporting now? You've seen the debates. I was asking before, who do you think kind of won the debate? That's really a horse race question, and I apologize for that. It should have been a little more thoughtful question. But to the extent that I can give excuses for my behavior, I was on the road, we were doing things on the fly, and I wasn't, able to pay the kind of attention to my show that I do when I'm here, which is, thank God I'm back here. So, which candidate are you supporting now and why? Has your mind changed on anybody? Or if you've been a longtime supporter of a particular candidate, I know, because Bernie was on this show for 11 years, there's a lot of Bernie supporters who watch this program. If Bernie doesn't end up being at the top of the ticket, or if you're a longtime supporter of Kamala Harris, or if you're a longtime supporter of Pete Buttigieg, or you're a longtime supporter of Marianne Williamson, or you're a longtime supporter of Andrew Yang. If they don't get it, who else is acceptable to you? Who's your second choice? Who's your third choice? I'm not so interested in who's absolutely unacceptable to you. I don't want to wander into that circular firing squad territory. But, we've got a very, very broad field here. And the next debate, which is going to be in, I think a month and a half, something like that, is going to be just like this one. It's when, Sean? End of this month. It's the end of this month, the end of July. Oh, that's right. It's July 1st. I keep thinking it's June. It's July 1st. So anyhow, at the end of this month, we're going to have the second debate, and it's going to be just like this one, where you're going to have 20 candidates, two nights, 10 each. And then they're going to, narrow the field in all probability. In fact, I think they're going to have to. And I'm looking forward to narrowing the field. And I'm looking forward, frankly, to a debate where it's not being done. You have 1 minute to answer a complex question about serious policy. Come on, that's crap. I mean, that's nonsense. But anyway. So and how, in your opinion, if the person that you are supporting is elected, or your second choice or third choice is elected, let's pretend we have ranked choice voting. How will that person being president affect the future direction of the United States? We have seen basically kind of 3 different types of, at least in my lifetime, I've seen 3 different types of governance in the United States. The old-fashioned FDR kind of, New Deal, Great Society governance. That lasted from the time I was born in 1951 right up until 1980 with Reaganism. And then from 1981 until 1992, or from 1981 till 1989, we saw hardcore right-wing Reaganism. And then from 89 with George Herbert Walker Bush through the Clinton administration, through 2001, we saw kind of moderate, I don't even want to call it Eisenhowerism, because Eisenhower was actually a fan of the New Deal. I mean, Eisenhower was more progressive than certainly more progressive than any of the Blue Dog Democrats right now. And so then we saw this kind of middle of the road thing, and then Bush came in, and we went back to hard right militarism, and then Obama came in, and we went back to kind of the middle of the road thing, and then Trump came in, and now we've gone to hard right pseudo-fascism. So how do you think that person is going to get us there? And then later on in the second and third hours of the program, we're going to get into, has the refugee crisis met the definition of a mass atrocity? What are the chances that this election will turn us, more toward FDRism or more toward Reaganism? And Jimmy Carter calling Donald Trump an illegitimate president. I want to do a deep dive on that in the third hour of our show. So stick around. We got a lot coming up.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I've got a lot more details here on the economy and all this kind of stuff. It's just, in fact, I haven't even started. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's pick up some phone calls here. And if I can remember how to use my... No, it's great. It is so great being back. Jared, in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. You're on the air.
Hello, Tom. Nice to talk with you again. On the issue of the collapse and where the political spectrum is going to move, I would first like to address your point about the presidents. I would argue that the U.S. has been a fascist country for quite a long time now. I would say probably maybe since 1908, when Teddy Roosevelt created through an executive order over Congress the Bureau of Investigation, or maybe Wilson when he engaged in the first Red
The Bureau of
Scare
Investigation is what we now call the Secret Service.
The FBI.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. The FBI, and a little bit of historical weirdness. Do you know what Abraham Lincoln signed the morning that he was shot that night at Ford Theater?
What?
He signed into creation the Secret Service.
Ah, that's ironic right there.
Yeah, it really is. Although the Secret Service didn't actually start protecting the president until the 20th century, early in the 20th century. I think it was after McKinley was shot. But he created the Secret Service that morning, and then he went to Ford Theater that night. Anyhow, back to you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's good. But anyway, I would argue we've been a fascist country for quite a long while now, at least not in name, but in practice, in terms of the merging of corporations and an authoritarian state for the interest of the elites. And while using things like racism, sexism, and all this other stuff in order to keep, the idiots in line, basically.
Yeah, although so I would just put an asterisk next to that and point out that the 8 years of four administrations of Franklin Roosevelt, the last one tragically cut short, and Harry Truman's 1.5 administrations, there was serious pushback against that corporate ownership of our government. I mean, they weren't altogether successful, but there was serious pushback.
Yeah, there was serious pushback because there was a lot of mass mobilization and the likes of that. But the thing is, I don't see that happening again because I think the elites have realized that they can't allow that situation to happen again. That's why you have things like the corporate media now. You have the dumbing down of society. Most Americans don't read anymore. You're just seeing a complete collapse of society. So I think things are just going to continue the way it is, even when the collapse happens, because the elites are so out of touch. They're basically something akin to the French during the late Louis XVI regime.
Yeah, but look at what happened to Louis.
They were trying. Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. But I think this economic system could continue even longer than we could probably think, because things could either collapse just right away, or they could collapse like 60 years from now. We don't really know. Yeah. And that's just us speculating.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken. And it's basically ceased to be an economic system now, certainly under Trump, but for a long time in many other ways, become an economic/political system. Great points all. Thanks a lot for the call. I'm not quite as pessimistic as you are, I guess would be the word, but I am very, very concerned. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just wanted to finish up my whole rant here on the economy, and then we'll get to your phone calls here after the break at the bottom of the hour. But before I go into the whole economy riff, Trump just came back from the G20, where he took a little side trip. It was in Seoul, South Korea, so he took a little side trip to meet his good buddy, the most brutal dictator in the world, Kim Jong-un, who apparently had the staff that organized the last meeting with Trump executed. It just occurred to me, maybe he's not the most brutal dictator in the world. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman had, 20 some odd people beheaded recently, and one of them was actually crucified out in the desert. And of course, he chopped up, apparently on his orders, this is what the UN is saying now, chopped up Mr. Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, and Donald Trump is like, they're going to buy $400 billion worth of stuff from us, so, we'll take their money and we'll take their oil. But this G20 trip for Trump, it was amazing. Yesterday I was sitting in the airport, and Fox News was on the monitor, and the sound was off. So but they had the closed captioning on, and I was reading closed caption, and they were literally alternating between. On the one hand, they would have, Donald Trump makes history, meeting with Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump steps into history. Donald Trump, most historic president, like this. And then they would go to, a clip of, they had Congressman Tim Ryan had apparently been interviewed and had made some points that they didn't like. And so then they would go to basically ridiculing Congressman Ryan and ridiculing Democrats. And so it was back and forth, praising Trump, hating Democrats, praising Trump, hating Democrats. It was just... watching it with the sound off and watching the chyrons and the closed captioning was just astonishing. But it really was a failure, Trump's trip to the G20. He gave Kim a major propaganda victory and got nothing for it. He gave concessions to China. He caved in on Huawei and got nothing for it. He ignored the murder of an American journalist, Khashoggi, hanging out with Mohammed bin Salman and basically high-fiving the guy. He joked with Vladimir Putin about Russia's election interference and, made it pretty clear that he still believes Putin over U.S. intelligence agencies. And, his love of authoritarian leaders and his disdain for our traditional liberal democracy, and I don't mean liberal like I'm a liberal, I mean liberal democracy the way that it's actually, the way that Vladimir Putin was talking about it when he said it's dead around the world. That was created in this country, in Philadelphia, in the summer of 1787. It was ratified in 1789, or there were a series of ratification conventions, and I think it was 1791. I'd have to go back and look, when this all started. But that's the liberal democracy is the United States. It is Europe. And Putin says, it's dying. And Trump says, Putin was right. So back to the economy. We just entered the longest expansion ever. The economy grew at just 2.3% a year since June 2009, the end of the Bush recession. That's half the average 4.3 growth rate of the previous 10 expansions since World War II. Over the past 10 years, 60% of all income has gone to the top of 1%, people making over $500,000 a year. Inflation-adjusted salaries for secondary school teachers, for example, just as a kind of canary in the coal mine, since 2009 have gone up 0.3%. That's it. And CEOs, their salaries have gone up 65% since 2009. Life expectancy and fertility rates are actually dropping among the lower.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Among the middle class and lower middle class in the United States, we're actually seeing a drop in life expectancy and a rise in suicide rates, an alarming one. We'll be back. It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 102. This is about campaign work that Carter Page did for the Trump campaign. Following the convention, Page's trip to Moscow and his advocacy for pro-Russia foreign policy drew the media's attention and began to generate substantial press coverage. The campaign responded by distancing itself from Page, describing him as a, quote, informal foreign policy advisor who did not speak for Mr. Trump or the campaign, end quote. On September 23, 2016, Yahoo News reported that U.S. intelligence officials were investigating whether Page had opened private communications with senior Russian officials to discuss U.S. sanctions policy under a possible Trump administration. A campaign spokesman told Yahoo News that Page had no role in the campaign and that the campaign was not aware of any of his activities, past or present. On September 24, 2016, Page was formally removed from the campaign. Although Page had been removed from the campaign after the election, he sought a position in the Trump administration. On November 14, 2016, he submitted an application to the transition team that inflated his credentials and experiences, stating that in his capacity as a Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, he had met with top world leaders and effectively responded to diplomatic outreach efforts from senior government officials in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. We're now on page 103. Page received no response from the transition team. When Page took a personal trip to Moscow in December 2016, he met again with at least one Russian government official. That interaction and a discussion of the December trip are set forth in Volume 1, Section 4. Number 4, Dmitry Simes and the Center for the National Interest. Members of the Trump campaign interacted on several occasions with the Center for the National Interest, CNI, principally through its president and chief executive officer, Dmitry Simes. CNI is a think tank with expertise in and connections to the Russian government. Simes was born in the former Soviet Union and immigrated to the United States in the 1970s. In April 2016, candidate Trump delivered his first speech on foreign policy and national security at an event hosted by the National Interest, a publication affiliated with CNI. Then Senator Jeff Sessions and Russian Ambassador Kislyak both attended the event, and as a result, it gained some attention in relation to Sessions' confirmation hearings to become Attorney General. Sessions had various other contacts with CNI during the campaign period on foreign policy matters, including Russia. Jared Kushner also interacted with Simes about Russian issues during the campaign. The investigation did not identify evidence that the campaign passed or received any messages to or from the Russian government through CNI or Simes. Subtitle A, CNI and Dmitry Simes connect with the Trump campaign. CNI is a Washington-based nonprofit organization that grew out of a center founded by former President Richard Nixon. CNI describes itself, quote, as a voice for strategic realism in U.S. foreign policy, end quote, and publishes a bi-monthly foreign policy magazine, The National Interest. CNI is overseen by a board of directors and an advisory council that is largely honorary and whose members at the relevant time included Sessions, who served as an advisor to candidate Trump on national security and foreign policy issues. Dmitry Simes is president and CEO of CNI and the publisher and CEO of The National Interest. Simes was born in the former Soviet Union, emigrated to the United States in the early 1970s, and joined CNI's predecessor after working at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Simes personally has many contacts with former and current Russian government officials, as does CNI collectively. As CNI stated when seeking a grant from the Carnegie Corporation in 2015, CNI has, quote, unparalleled access to Russian officials and politicians among Washington think tanks, end quote, in part because CNI has arranged for U.S. delegations to visit Russia and for Russian delegations to visit the United States as part of a so-called, Track 2 diplomatic effort. On March 14, 2016, CNI board member Richard Plepfer organized a luncheon for CNI and its honorary chairman, Henry Kissinger, at the Time Warner Building in New York. The idea behind the event was to generate interest in CNI's work and recruit new board members for CNI. Along with Simes, attendees at the event included Jared Kushner, son-in-law of candidate Trump. Kushner told the office, that's the special prosecutor, the Mueller office, that the event came at a time when the Trump campaign was having trouble securing support from experienced foreign policy professionals, and that as a result, he decided to seek Simes's assistance during the March 14th event. Simes and Kushner spoke again on March 24th, 2016 on the telephone, 3 days after Trump had publicly named the team of foreign policy advisors that had been put together on short notice. On March 31st, 2016, Simes and Kushner had an in-person one-on-one meeting in Kushner's New York office. During that meeting, Simes told Kushner that the best way to handle foreign policy issues of the Trump campaign would be to organize an advisory group of experts to meet with candidate Trump and develop a foreign policy approach that was consistent with Trump's voice. Simes believed that Kushner was receptive to that suggestion. Simes also had contact with other officials associated with the Trump campaign regarding the campaign's foreign policy positions. For example, on June 17, 2016, Simes sent J.D. Gordon an email with, quote, a memo to Senator Sessions that we discussed at our recent meeting, end quote, and asked Gordon to both read it and share it with Sessions, page 105. So it's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So just to welcome back, just to finish up this this thing about the economy, when life expectancy starts dropping, and when fertility rates, the number of children that people are having, starts dropping, and this is for the bottom half of Americans, and maybe even the bottom 60-70% of Americans, and more young adults are living with their parents and delaying marriage. Those are typically things that you only see during depressions or serious economic recessions. And yet that's what's going on right now. This should give us great cause for concern. Donald Trump promised that he was going to ease the burden of student loans. Another thing is screwing up our economy. Instead, this is what he campaigned on in 2016. Remember, oh yeah, we're going to deal with student loans. It's good. It's all good. Instead, his budget proposed the elimination of subsidized student loans and cuts to other programs that help students pay tuition. His Department of Education ended its sharing of information with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on the $1.3 trillion in student loans that are out there. Therefore, that information is no longer available to be used to sue predatory loan companies. The Trump administration wanted to, here's the quote. The Trump administration sought to offer defrauded borrowers only partial loan forgiveness. Now, it's supposed to be, if you've been defrauded by something like Trump University, you're supposed to get all your money back, or you're supposed to get your loan forgiven, right? Because you were the victim of fraud. And so Trump changed that. So yeah, you get a little bit back, but not all of it if you got, screwed by Trump University or something like it, a fraudulent educational institution. And they have reinvigorated the predatory for-profit education industry. He promised he'd deliver great education, and instead he's undermining our public schools. He's cut billions out of the education department, cut grants for schools for textbooks and school safety efforts. He selected an education secretary who is outright hostile to public schools and teachers. He's chipping away at civil rights on, reducing campus sexual assault guidelines in favor of boosting the rights of the accused, et cetera, et cetera. So, it just goes on and on. Is G20 a complete failure? As I said, there's more. We'll continue. I'll get into this stuff as we continue through the program. But let's pick up some of your calls and some of your thoughts. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, economy is a very interesting topic, but I kind of want to dovetail off of what the first caller said. I think what's going on is that we have an entrenchment of power that doesn't even. I mean, there was a lot of very powerful forces in the 1930s to control the situation, but they have so much control, and it is worldwide. I'm rereading a book by Tariq Ali called The Extreme Center, and it's very dismal, but I think he accurately paints a picture of where we are politically. And yes, we have an economy political, not a political economy. It is something that I think what is going to happen is that we will have to have a crisis. The whole system will have to fall apart, and that might even mean that we have a fascist-like period in this country where there's just total control until people get sick of it, because the information isn't out there. Free speech TV, you do a great job. There are a lot of people on the periphery, but to get through to a lot of the disenchanted millions of people who, yes, they're choosing opioids, they're becoming alcoholics, their life expectancy is decreasing, and yet, there's some hopeful signs, but how do you change our political structure so that you can actually tackle these problems? And ironically, capitalism will fail itself then. And FDR saved capitalism, and I do believe that there are some good things that come out of capitalism, but unrestrained, this is where it leads an elite. We're going in a feudal way, in a feudal direction rather than in more democracy and increasing middle class prosperity that we saw before Ronald Reagan.
Right, as in FEUDAL, not FUTILE. I agree, John, and you're essentially singing the song that I laid out in 300 pages in my book, The Crash of 2016.
Yep, I have that also.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, and I think we're of a similar mind. Thank you very much for the call, John. Always nice to hear from you. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to chime in on the debate that was last week. And
Wednesday, Thursday,
specifically, correct, yeah. And more specifically, Mayor Buttigieg's performance, because I think he did something that we didn't give him enough credit for, and that's when he was asked about the police shooting that happened in his town there. He openly admitted, yes, this was my fault. We have not achieved the task that we had set out to. And
right. And how long has it been since you've heard a politician admit that they blew it, or that they didn't quite hit the goal that they were trying to reach? That's amazing.
That humility there, I think, just increased my respect for him so much. And I wished, and I was I wish that Joe Biden would learn a lot from his approach, because I don't think it hurt him in that debate at all. I think it helped increase his credibility, seeing him as a human being, somebody that can admit when they're at fault, and somebody that says, we didn't get it done. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. And I thought that, him saying that really spoke to his character.
Yeah, and his numbers are going up, and his fundraising apparently is going up spectacularly. And and the question is this because a broad cross section of Americans are saying, whether he's gay or not doesn't matter. He's a great guy, and we love what he's saying, and we're going to throw some money at him. Or has the broader gay community in particular, but the LGBTQ community overall, kind of gotten to the point where they're saying, this guy actually has a shot at it, and we're going to kick in some money. So, where is that? His fundraising numbers are doing really well. Where is that money coming from? And I don't know the answer to that question. If it's the latter, then there's a limit to how far he can go. If it's the former, then he can shoot the moon. And and we'll see. I mean, it's always been that way, by the way, with candidates who have very specific constituencies, whether they're racial or ideological or regional or whatever it may be. Back to you, Marty. You wanted to say something?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if he ends up being the candidate, I would vote for him in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah.
Pretty much anybody on that stage, I would vote for.
Enthusiastically.
I think he'll,
yes.
Oh, very much so. I don't believe he's going to be the. I don't think when everything clears, he's going to be the candidate. But I think he's got a bright political future ahead of himself, and then eventually we might see the first gay president. I would have
first openly gay president. I think we've had at least one gay president, and probably two.
Yeah, openly, correct, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you, Marty. Thank you for the call. Fascinating stuff. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, your thoughts?
Yeah. So my top three picks, actually, the top pick's Bernie. That's because when I'm looking at policy, he's the only candidate that's always been consistent with what he said. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are talking about this debate like, what did Cory Booker wear? How did they speak? Was it too loud? I think that's all really superficial stuff. You got to look at the policies, and Bernie's been the only person holding the Democratic Party accountable for, being the progressive base, pandering to us for votes. But secondly, what I guess I was going to say is, after the caller saying that Biden showed his true character, I guess it was a pretty racist character, and Kamala Harris being a cop is really funny watching them debate on stage about that. But anyway.
Yeah, let's not pick on people here, and I don't think Joe Biden is a racist, and I don't think he showed racist character. I think he, the 19, if I could just speak to that, Robbie, for just a second, since you brought it up, and I don't want to just leave it hanging out there. I remember the 1970s, and I remember the thing around busing. And a very, very close friend, Louise was reminding me of this over the weekend, a very close friend of ours, her name was Joyce, and she and her husband had bought a house in a neighborhood 2 blocks from a school that was a really nice school in Lansing, Michigan, and she was very excited because her child was going to go to that school. She had just moved to Lansing the year or maybe 2 years earlier. And the busing thing came down, and her kid was going to be bused to another school. She had no concern at all that the school that her kid was being bused to was, majority black. Her concern was that school had been chronically underfunded for the last 50 years and, was lacking school supplies and had generally poor performance. She was concerned about the quality of education her kid was going to get, not the color of the people that they were going to hang out with. And there was a lot of blowback to busing. The first wave of busing was mostly taking, minority kids, largely black kids, out of poor schools and moving them into white middle class schools. But then the second wave of it, and this is what I remember with Joyce, was moving white kids into the black schools also. And there was like this blowback, and sure, a lot of it, probably the majority of it, was racial blowback, but there was also blowback that wasn't racial. And I think that's what Joe Biden was talking about. So, let's
what I wanted to bring up with
back
the
to you, Robbie.
So the DNC, what's happening right now is I see that Joe Biden is basically repeating what we did previously. And I wanted to get your thoughts. I can't support the DNC because they rigged the election in 2016, which you admitted to me before with the media. And also, did you know that the voter suppression, that only affects the primary election? Did you know that all the voter purging, when people showed up at the electoral polls and showed up and they got a provisional ballot, that was just because they had been switched from the candidate, which means they could still have voted in the actual election, but they weren't able to vote in the primary.
Yeah, you're talking in California, and it's like a little more. It's a little more complex than that. But
Arizona and in New York.
Robbie, stop for a second. I really am wondering who you like. If you've got complaints about candidates or the party or something, that's for another day.
The only candidate that has the single consistent platform, hasn't flipped on anything, supported gay marriage back in 1980. Like, this one candidate is the only candidate that I can see being. Pete B said that people should be doing mandatory military service. That's complete. He's like supporting the Israeli occupation. I can't support anybody else except Bernie.
Okay, got it. Please, don't follow Robbie's example. I'm not interested in hearing you trash Pete Buttigieg or anybody. I mean, let's keep the circular firing squad to a minimum. And in fact, in the future, I'm just going to cut people off if they try to do what Robbie did.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 46 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Mark in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Tom. It's good to be on the show.
Thank you.
I called in when you were speaking about, who's your number two pick if your number one doesn't get in. And I think, do you agree with electability? I mean, Trump has to be beaten.
Yeah, and somebody called last week and made the point that they thought that the most kick-ass candidate on the entire stage in both nights was Bill de Blasio, and Kamala Harris was probably number two in that regard, or maybe you could flip it. I
agree with that.
And was suggesting that a ticket of those two, and I've been thinking about that ever since. I mean, because I think electability in the context of Donald Trump is important. Back to you, Mark. I'm sorry.
I'd agree with that. I don't think the country is ready to elect, let's say, openly gay person. And
people said that in 2008 about electing a black man.
Well, and a minority at the same time. I don't think the country's ready to elect two women. I'm not trashing anybody by any means. Yeah. I was Biden-Harris person, and Biden at his age obviously would be on the top of that ticket. But you mentioned de Blasio, and I hadn't made that matchup. I like it though. Now that you've brought it up, I think what isn't being addressed enough is what ticket will bring the right out of the woodwork than any other ticket. We have to. That I don't think gets enough consideration.
Right. Well, I'm unfortunately, Bill de Blasio is getting almost no publicity, and he's not really well known outside of New York City, or at least outside of the East Coast. And so, as good a candidate as he may be, the way the media plays this stuff, I think he's got a real steep uphill climb to even get into the second set of, or the third round of debates. The one where they're going to really winnow it back.
Right. And that's what they're called now. We don't even, it's not even called news now. It's just media.
Yeah, there you go.
And,
there you go. So, Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Johnny O in Taylor, Michigan. Hey, Johnny, what's up? You got about a minute.
Professor Tom?
Yeah.
You were right about Bill de Blasio and these other gentlemen. I'm sure there's at least 10 out of the 20 that could go on to the next break.
Yeah.
Next round.
Yeah, I think probably.
Forget about Joe Biden. I love him. He's a nice man. But he's not going to create 3 more unions, which we need. I was just with Debbie Dingell Friday at a town hall about Medicare for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
She's an incredible speaker.
Yeah,
and
she is.
So passionate. It's so, all about her husband, John, who gave us Medicare for all in 1965 for the senior citizens. Their legacy is incredible.
Yeah. So, but Debbie Dingell's not the candidate. Who are your picks, Johnny?
Bernie and Liz.
Bernie and Liz. Okay, I got it.
Yes, sir.
Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mark in Michigan City, Indiana. Hey, Mark, your thoughts on Democratic candidates?
Hey, good morning, Tom. First time calling.
Thank you.
My first choice is Elizabeth Warren, and I believe she's picked up the complete playbook manual of Bernie Sanders. And I think Bernie originally entered the race for his one issue, among his many issues, Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren has picked up the torch and will carry it. And I think in a few months down the line, if Bernie sees a broker convention, he'll step aside, and I think let Elizabeth take it.
We'll see how that shakes out, Mark. I remember very well. I mean, Bernie was on this program for some of that. In 2016, or really in 2015, when people were calling into the program constantly and saying, Bernie, jump into the race. And he was saying, I want to see who, if somebody else gets into the race. He said, I'm paraphrasing here, but I remember this very clearly. He was saying that he felt that Hillary Clinton needed a primary challenger. He just wasn't sure it should be him. And the person that most people were talking about challenging Hillary Clinton was Elizabeth Warren. And I personally, this is just my opinion. I had no conversation with Bernie or any of his people about this at the time. But my sense of it was that Bernie was waiting to see if Liz Warren was going to take on Hillary Clinton. And when she didn't, then Bernie got into the race. And of course, the rest is history. And then he did so spectacularly well that he's back again, even though Elizabeth Warren is in the race. Back to you, Mark.
Yes, and I'll support all candidates, no matter who gets the nomination. Even if it's Joe Biden, I'm going to campaign for him and set up yard signs in Indiana. We got to get this tyrant out of office.
Yeah.
And that's the way I feel about it.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the call. Susan in Ingles, Florida. Hey, Susan, what's up?
Greetings and salutations, Tom.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm kind of looking at Bernie or Elizabeth. I think they both have great plans and know how they're going to implement them and finance them. I look at the candidates that we have on the Democratic ticket. We've got a lot of talent out there. I'd like to see Bill or Camellia as AGs. We need a pit bull to clean up the mess that Rump is creating.
Yeah.
I'd like to see Marianne as maybe an ambassador to smooth some of our allies' feathers.
She would I think Marianne Williamson would make a great president. And if she can get there, boy, would I work my heart out for her. If not, I think that she would make a great ambassador to the United Nations or Secretary of State.
And I would like to also see maybe Tulsi or Pete, work within the VA system.
Yeah.
Or
maybe, put Tulsi in charge of the Defense Department.
Yeah, well, see, they both have military background. They both have seen the horrors of what war can do.
Yep.
And what happens to the people that have to go over to those places, and how it changes them and affects them the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
but,
I'm with you. We really have an extraordinary field of people. There's so many good people. This is why I was so, basically offended by the one caller who just wanted to take shots at people. Susan, thank you for the call. I really appreciate that. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Professor. There was a survey taken of 25,000 people outside of the United States of America, and they don't have a very good opinion, very favorable opinion of our country right now. And you know what's obvious to everybody is that we got a psychopath in the White House. And what's even more amazing to me is we're concerned we may not be able to get him out. We know we got a psychopath in the White House, and we may not be able to get him out. What does that say for us? And my choice for presidential candidate in a fantasy world is Marianne Williamson. In the real world, okay, we're going to deal with the real world, Papa Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams. Thank you very much.
Okay, but Stacey Abrams is not in the race, Morris. Okay. Morris, thanks a lot for the call. Let's see here. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to let you know that this is a thing now on social media with people calling up saying they were Bernie supporters. They get a little crazy, and then they start going off about 2016 and the DNC and the DCCC, and if they do that again, I'm going to vote for the third party. I personally think they're paid trolls.
Yeah, these are the kind of memes that come out of either the Russian media or the RNC. Yep.
Yes. Yes, I got hit with it yesterday. I run a little Facebook group. I won't give you the name. We just share news and information like a lot of people with a progressive bent, and I just couldn't believe the discussion I was having with this guy. And I said, so you mean to tell me that you would rather tank our democracy just because the Democratic candidate doesn't check off all your boxes? Finally, he stopped. He stopped trolling. I don't like to ban people, but I do like to engage in discussion, and I think that's the way you have to frame it, because that's exactly what we're looking at in this election.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Kathy, thanks for sharing that story with us. That was a great one. Cynthia in Placentia, California. Hey, Cynthia, a minute to the end of the hour. Cynthia? No, Cynthia. Okay, let's try Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. That minute's yours, Gloria. Gloria? Oh, my goodness. Robert in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robert, you got a little less than a minute now.
Okay, I just wanted to bring up, I think the DNC rigged the election, so it's hard for me to have any faith in basically them holding.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm not going to do circular fire raid squad. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You got a quick one, Chris? Oh, hey, Chris, let me put you on hold. We got 10 seconds here. That's not fair to you. Hang on just a minute. I'm going to put you back on hold. Again, I realize that there's going to be Republican trolls calling in. Trying to trash the Democratic Party, trying to trash Democratic candidates. And I realize that there are some genuine progressives and Democrats who are unhappy about some of the candidates out there and particularly about the 2016 election. I'm not going to relitigate any of that on this program. And when trolls call in, or even just unhappy Democrats, there will be plenty of time to have conversations about those things, but not today.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
It's the Mueller Report. We're reading from page 131. This is under the title of Paul Manafort's Ties to Russia and Ukraine, and the subtitle of Oleg Deripaska Consulting Work. In 2017, Deripaska invested through another entity in Pericles Emerging Market Partners, LP, also known as Pericles, an investment fund created by Manafort and former Manafort business partner Richard Davis. The Pericles Fund was established to pursue investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. Gates stated in interviews with The Office that the venture led to a deterioration of the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska. In particular, when the fund failed, litigation between Manafort and Deripaska ensued. Gates stated that by 2009, Manafort's business relationship with Deripaska had, quote, dried up. According to Gates, various interactions with Deripaska and his intermediaries over the past few years have involved trying to resolve the legal dispute. As described below, in 2016, Manafort, Gates, Kalimnik, and others engaged in efforts to revive the Deripaska relationship and resolve the litigation. Political consulting work. Through Deripaska, Manafort was introduced to Ronit Akhmenatov, a Ukrainian oligarch who hired Manafort as a political consultant. In 2005, Akhmenatov hired Manafort to engage in political work supporting the Party of Regions, a political party in Ukraine that was generally understood to align with Russia. Manafort assisted the Party of Regions in regaining power, and its candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, won the presidency in 2010. Manafort became a close and trusted political advisor to Yanukovych during his time as president of Ukraine. Yanukovych served in that role until 2014 when he fled to Russia amidst popular protests. Konstantin Kalimnik. Kalimnik is a Russian national who has lived in both Russia and Ukraine and was a longtime Manafort employee. Kalimnik had direct and close access to Yanukovych and his senior entourage, and he facilitated communications between Manafort and his clients, including Yanukovych and multiple Ukrainian oligarchs. Kalimnik also maintained a relationship with Deripaska's deputy, Viktor Boyarkin, a Russian national who previously served in the defense attaché office of the Russian embassy to the United States. Manafort told the Mueller prosecutor's office that he did not believe Kalimnik was working as a Russian spy. The FBI, however, assesses that Kalimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. Several pieces of the office's evidence, including witness interviews and emails obtained through court-authorized search warrants, support that assessment. And then there's a series of bullet points here. 1. Kalimnik was born on April 27, 1970, in Oblast, then of the Soviet Union, and attended the Military Institute of the Ministry of Defense from 87 till 1992. Sam Patton, a business partner to Kalimnik, stated that Kalimnik told him he was a translator in the Russian army for 7 years, and that he later worked in the Russian armament industry selling arms and military equipment. U.S. government visa records, another bullet point, revealed that Kalimnik obtained a visa to travel to the United States with a Russian diplomatic passport in 1997. Another bullet. Kalimnik worked with the International Republican Institute's, IRI, Moscow office, where he did translation work and generally office management from 1998 to 2005. While another official recalled the incident differently, one former associate of Kalimnik's at IRI told the FBI that Kalimnik was fired from his post because his links to Russian intelligence were too strong. That same individual stated that it was well known that at IRI that Kalimnik had links to the Russian government. Another bullet. Jonathan Hawker, a British national who is a public relations consultant at FTI Consulting, worked with DMI on a public relations campaign for Yanukovych. After Hawker's work for DMI ended, Kilimnik contacted Hawker about working for a Russian government entity on a public relations project that would promote in Western and Ukrainian media Russia's position on its 2014 invasion of Crimea. In the last bullet point, Gates suspected that Kilimnik was a spy, a view that he shared with Manafort, Hawker, and Alexander Vanderswan, an attorney who had worked with DMI on a report for the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The next paragraph has been deleted by Bill Barr. B, contacts during Paul Manafort's time with the Trump campaign. Subset, Paul Manafort joins the campaign. Manafort served on the Trump campaign from late March to August 19, 2016. On March 29, 2016, the campaign announced that Manafort would serve as the campaign's convention manager. On May 19, 2016, Manafort was promoted to campaign chairman and chief strategist, and Gates, who had been assisting Manafort on the campaign, was appointed deputy campaign chairman. Thomas Barak and Roger Stone both recommended Manafort to candidate Trump. In early 2016, at Manafort's request, Barak suggested to Trump that Manafort join the campaign to manage the Republican convention. Stone had worked with Manafort from approximately 1980 until the mid-1990s through various consulting and lobbying firms. Manafort met Trump in 1982 when Trump hired the Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly lobbying firm. Over the years, Manafort saw Trump at political and social events in New York City and at Stone's wedding, and Trump requested VIP status at the 1998 and 1996 Republican conventions worked by Manafort. That's interesting. The 1988 convention and 96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Ukraine. It's the Mueller Report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We were in our previous hour discussing the possibility that the U.S. economy could crash. We're seeing levels of inequality. We're seeing levels of wealth being piled up. We're seeing levels of destruction of the middle class and working class that we literally have not seen since 1929. In fact, we hit 1929 numbers several years ago. We're beyond that. We've also entered the longest expansion literally in the history of the United States, the longest economic expansion since the George Washington administration. And if you take out debt, if you eliminate from the economic numbers the money borrowed by the federal government, by big corporations, and by individual homeowners, if you eliminate that debt, 2015 was when the economy stopped growing. 2016 was when the crash began. And, of course, I wrote a book called The Crash of 2016, specifically predicting that. All of our economic growth since 2016, all of it, has been because of debt. In other words, it's not real economic growth. It's what you would call economic stimulus. And it gets even worse than that. I mean, you know, the counties that Trump won, the swing counties, this is from Axios, swing counties that backed President Obama, then flipped to President Trump in 2016, are now struggling economically, a potential problem for Trump's reelection bid. Trump broke his promise to end manufacturing job losses in the key states. He promised a manufacturing renaissance. That's a New York Times headline. The second part of the headline, what happens in 2020 in places that lost those jobs? The New York Times, Donald J. Trump carried several key states in a vow to end manufacturing job losses. That has not happened. Mounting signs of an economic slowdown, weaker job growth, reduced manufacturing activity. I pointed out in the last hour, we're seeing for the first time, just over the last couple of years now, for the first time since the Great Depression, an increase an increase in mortality, or to say it correctly, a decrease in lifespan. We're actually seeing a decrease in lifespan right now. We're also seeing a decrease in what's called fertility. In other words, the number of children that people are having. And those are things that typically only happen during depressions.
The last time those two things happened in a serious way was, the period from 1929 through 1933 or 1934. And they're happening now. So the question for the first hour is, if this crash happens, is America going to move hard right, FDR left, or into a corporate oligarchy middle? And also I was asking, it's been a few days now since the debates. They were Wednesday, Thursday of last week. And, we've all had an opportunity to not only digest the debates and all the media, horse race coverage of them, but also, to think about and read about what the people actually said. And I know a lot of the candidates who a lot of Americans didn't know, Marianne Williams, Andrew Yang, Bill de Blasio, are, the Google numbers are just exploding on these people. And the fundraising numbers for Pete Buttigieg have really, really gone up. And if it turns out, we saw this with Barack Obama in 2008, right? Barack Obama was doing really well with fundraising in the African American community, but he hadn't broken out into the larger community. And then he did, and then he showed up and in the debate with Hillary Clinton, and he broke out into the larger community and started raising money right across the board and became president of the United States. And so the question that we don't know the answer to right now is Mayor Pete drawing most of his support largely from the LGBTQ community, or has he already broken out into the larger community? And if not, when will he or will he? And I'm guessing that he probably will. He's got a hell of a message, and the way that he's been campaigning, it's like, oh, and by the way, he's a gay man who's married to another man. I'm actually very, very pleased with how that's being treated. That it hasn't become a larger issue, and instead his policies and his service to his country is there. But so anyhow, I was asking, if your favorite candidate, and I know, we've done these polls on this show, we do instant polls and things, and Bernie was on this program for 11 years, every single Friday taking calls from people. Some of the people who worked on Bernie's campaign back 4 years ago told me that pretty much, particularly early on, most of the rallies he would show up at, people would yell brunch with Bernie, right? So, for many people, their introduction to Bernie was this program. And so I get it that there's a lot of people who love Bernie who listen to this program. But if he ends up not being the nominee, who's your second choice? Or, if your first choice is Kamala Harris, or is Liz Warren, or is Pete Buttigieg, or is Marianne Williamson, or whoever it may be, if your first candidate doesn't make it, who's your second or third choice? And where does that go? So that was our first hour, and how do you think that person being president will affect the future direction of America? I also want to get into the what a mass atrocity is. This is pretty amazing. A mass atrocity is defined as a government intentionally inflicting harsh conditions, pain, distress on civilians for political purposes. That's what a mass atrocity is. Now, they vary in their severity from, death camps to simply just, terrible imprisonment to, arguably the Tiananmen Square, those kinds of things. But a pediatrician who studies this stuff and has actually written about this and visited Cambodia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sri Lanka, and other places all around the world. This pediatrician said that first of all, he said that what we have here are concentration camps. He said that they're comparable to torture facilities, just leaving the lights on all night on these children. The UN defines that as torture. We used that as a way of breaking people when we were interrogating, what we thought were Al-Qaeda people in Afghanistan and Iraq. But he goes on to say these harsh conditions have been intentionally inflicted on children as part of a broader plan to deter others from migrating, and therefore meets the definition of a mass atrocity, a deliberate, systemic attack on civilians. And like past atrocities, it's being committed by a complex organizational structure made up of people at all different levels of involvement. And this Teach First is the
posted this over on DU, but it's basically, this is coming out of a piece by Kate Cronin-Furman in the New York Times on the 29th of last month. And add to that, First Lady Laura Bush, which is pretty amazing. I mean, you know, she's married to a war criminal herself. Her husband lied us into the war in Iraq, which led to thousands of American deaths and hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million Iraqi deaths, over 5 million Iraqis displaced. The Iranians essentially taking over Iraq, which is going to make any war that Donald Trump wants to have with Iran very, very problematic. And, you know, but basically, and then, you know, Bush and Cheney having Jay Bybee and John Yoo write these papers, and apparently Brett Kavanaugh was right in the middle of this. These were among the papers that the 97% of his papers that the Republicans refused to allow to be released during his hearing before the Senate, which should have just shut down the hearing. But it didn't, you know, because Mitch McConnell, he doesn't care about democracy. He stole a seat from Barack Obama in a way that will go down in history as one of the most shameful things that has ever happened in the United States Senate. Mitch McConnell, a man who obviously is spitting in the face of American democracy. But when the wife of a man who tortured and murdered people who, in many cases, you know, the people who were picked up, you know, many of them were sold. We were paying a bounty, right, for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and so people were just turning in their neighbors who they didn't like. We were paying them $5,000, which is like 2 years worth of living expenses in Afghanistan. You know, her husband oversaw this and the torture that followed and all this kind of stuff. When she comes out and says this, and I'm going to read what she said, I think we all need to go, whoa, this is from BusinessInsider.com. She says the reason for these separations is she's talking about separating children from their parents at the border. She said, and she's talking about the Trump administration. She says the reason for these separations, this is Laura Bush, is a zero tolerance policy for their parents who are accused of illegally crossing our borders. I live in a border state. I appreciate the need to enforce and protect our international boundaries, but this zero tolerance policy is cruel. It is immoral. It breaks my heart. Our government should not be in the business of warehousing children in converted box stores or making plans to place them in tent cities in the desert outside of El Paso. She said, using these detention facilities to house thousands of children is, quote, eerily reminiscent, end quote, of the internment camps that held 120,000 Japanese during World War II and are, quote, again, from Laura Bush, now considered to have been one of the most shameful episodes of U.S. history. So not only does Mitch McConnell go down in history as a man who intentionally sabotaged democracy in the United States and wounded our republic, but, you know, the wife of George W. Bush is saying that Donald Trump essentially will too. So the question, I guess, if the refugee crisis here and our response to it meets the definition, this climate refugee crisis meets the definition of a mass atrocity, what do we do about it? What does the UN do about it? We'll be back. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You know, and who are your favorite candidates? Who are your second and third favorite candidates? Now you've had a chance to think about it. And what do we do about mass atrocities? And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Get my callers here and let's get right to it. There we go. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Chris, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, I missed you on 1350 AM. I was kind of devastated that
it happens. You know, we've picked up picked up 2 or 3 affiliates in the last 3 months, and we've lost one. So we're ahead of the game. What's up, Chris?
Well, anyhow, what to do? I could speak to the issue on mass atrocity. I have volunteered with asylum families. Mm-hmm. We need to fix the immigration system. I think that's pretty key. What people need to understand is, I read up on immigration law, and the law states that these asylum families have to have children. These families are traveling hundreds of miles on foot with barely the clothes on their back. Their immune systems are weak. That's why children are dying. And then, as you know, last week we had that poor father and daughter die, it's a travesty. It's inhumane. This is a humanitarian crisis. It is mass atrocity. And, in terms of the candidates, I haven't watched the debates. I intend to. I've watched clips. Because of his notoriety, Bernie Sanders is my first pick. Liz Warren is a second. A sure winner would be a Bernie Warren ticket. That's my take. And then they're following thereafter. I really love Tom. If we don't have an environment, we have nothing, right? So, Jay Inslee, I like, and then I would head him, as in charge of the EPA.
Oh yeah.
But Bernie Sanders has the name notoriety. I could tell you that women are loving Liz Warren for good reason. We're long overdue a competent female president.
Right, and the last one who ran got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton actually won that election, and I think Jimmy Carter was right that he's an illegitimate president. Anyhow, back to you, Chris.
Yeah. No, that's that's neither here nor there. We have to just continue to move forward. Bernie Sanders has the name notoriety. He brought us Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I love. We need progress. And they are conjuring up the spirits of FDR, not only FDR, but Eleanor Roosevelt, Elizabeth Perkins,
Francis Perkins.
Children would have continued to have died in factories had it not been for Harry Hopkins, Elizabeth Perkins, Eleanor Roosevelt.
And Francis Perkins is her name. And she and I think it was her sister, or it was the sister of somebody else in the administration, actually was doing surprise inspections of these factories. They went to West Virginia, in fact, and were doing surprise inspections in the textile factories, and busting them, shutting them down when they found child labor.
We need to bring back that spirit to the Democratic Party. We need to be a progressive party. But
yeah. The biggest challenge to that, Chris, aside from the Supreme Court decisions that let money into the race, is the corporate media, and it's going to continue to be a huge challenge for us. And we'll see where it shakes, how it shakes out and who we end up with as candidates. But I like all your choices. Chris, thank you very much for the call. We'll be back. It is 21 minutes past the hour. Show today is brought to you by 8 Sleep. The pod is the first bed designed to boost your performance. More at 8sleep.com/Tom, Thom. Well, we've got a lot of topics here on the table. Mass atrocities, the more bad economic news. What Donald Trump. One other thing. Let me just toss this in here. In fact, a couple of them. What Trump is up to and how this affects the economy. And really, what are the chances that an economic downturn, I wrote this book, The Crash of 2016, back in 2012 or thereabouts, 2011, I think I started on it. And basically saying that it's going to take a crisis of some kind to bring Americans together, particularly around a progressive vision. That historically has always been what's happened. The initial efforts at Reconstruction, very progressive. It came out of the crisis of the Civil War. The initial attempts to create our country, very progressive, came out of the crisis of the economic crash of the 1700s and the Revolutionary War. The New Deal came out of the economic crisis of the Great Depression. We'll see if the economy falls apart or if they continue to hold it together with baling wire and bubblegum, which is very much what they're doing right now, by the way. As I mentioned earlier, if you take out the debt, our economy has not grown since 2015. But then it gets even worse. Now Donald Trump is promoting a healthcare agenda, which is going to increase costs, lower coverage, and make it so that health insurance companies can once again take away your health insurance if you get sick or if they discover you have pre-existing conditions. In Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, major swing states, 52% of the voters say they trust the Democrats more than Trump. I'm surprised it's that low, frankly. 72% of respondents in those states would not vote for a candidate who supports health plans that would eliminate protections for people with pre-existing conditions. 77% said they wouldn't vote for a candidate unless his health insurance plan covers prescription drugs, and which has been part of the plans for Medicare for All for a long, long time. Trump's healthcare sabotage has already resulted in higher costs. His efforts to destroy the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, have sent the uninsured rates skyrocketing. Patients, this is as a result of Trump's policies. Patients' out-of-pocket costs for inpatient services, this is from Modern Healthcare magazine. Patients' out-of-pocket costs for inpatient services increased by 14% on average between 2017 and 2018. This is according to a new report from TransUnion Healthcare. The Los Angeles Times reports that enrollment in Obamacare and in the Affordable Care Act fell by a stunning 30% in that period, 2017-2018. To the same period a year earlier under President Obama, when outreach, advertising, and hands-on enrollment assistance was robust, it causes a 1 or 2% increase in premiums. Trump has basically shut down the federal government helping sign people up for Obamacare. He's made it really, really difficult for people to sign up. The result of that is that fewer people are signing up. When the insurance companies have a smaller pool of people and more uninsured people, a smaller pool of people means that your premiums are going to go up because they've got to cover that. And then you've got this lawsuit from these 34 Republican states that has been joined by Donald Trump to end the Affordable Care Act altogether, which would eliminate all protections against pre-existing conditions, and would just it's mind-boggling what this would do. And Americans are still struggling to get through with this. AT&T depicts Trump's broken promises to protect workers. This is amazing. When Trump got his tax cut, he said, "Hey, AT&T plans to increase U.S. capital spending $1 billion and provide a $1,000 bonus to more than 200,000 employees." Those are Trump's words. He says, "When we first had it passed, it started with AT&T. We might as well give them credit." And again, in another speech, he said, "I wouldn't say it's a total surprise, but one of the big things that happened after our tax cut that took place is AT&T and others came out very early and said they were going to pay thousands and thousands of people more to work for their companies." But turns out AT&T only passed along 1% of their tax windfall to workers, and that was in the form of a one-time bonus. It was about 1% of the $20 billion that they got. And then what do after they did these one-time bonuses? They quietly laid off thousands of U.S. workers. Many employees will be getting laid off in the coming weeks. AT&T is eliminating thousands of jobs across the United States, including 30 in central Indiana, including Communication Workers of America. The Daily News out of Dallas, the company claims they're cutting 2,000 jobs in Dallas, 1,800 jobs in Texas and Oklahoma. 23,000 jobs have been cut. Hang on just a second here.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The Guardian reports AT&T has eliminated 23,328 jobs since the tax cut bill was passed. Amazing. It's the Mueller Report. We're reading from page 131. This is under the title of Paul Manafort's Ties to Russia and Ukraine and the subtitle of Oleg Deripaska Consulting Work. In 2017, Deripaska invested through another entity in Pericles Emerging Market Partners, LP, also known as Pericles, an investment fund created by Manafort and former Manafort business partner Richard Davis. The Pericles Fund was established to pursue investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. Gates stated in interviews with the office that the venture led to a deterioration of the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska. In particular, when the fund failed, litigation between Manafort and Deripaska ensued. Gates stated that by 2009, Manafort's business relationship with Deripaska had, quote, dried up. According to Gates, various interactions with Deripaska and his intermediaries over the past few years have involved trying to resolve the legal dispute. As described below, in 2016, Manafort, Gates, Kalimnik, and others engaged in efforts to revive the Deripaska relationship and resolve the litigation. Political consulting work. Through Deripaska, Manafort was introduced to Ronit Akhmenatov, a Ukrainian oligarch who hired Manafort as a political consultant. In 2005, Akhmenatov hired Manafort to engage in political work supporting the Party of Regions, a political party in Ukraine that was generally understood to align with Russia. Manafort assisted the Party of Regions in regaining power, and its candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, won the presidency in 2010. Manafort became a close and trusted political advisor to Yanukovych during his time as president of Ukraine. Yanukovych served in that role until 2014 when he fled to Russia amidst popular protests. Konstantin Kalimnik. Kalimnik is a Russian national who has lived in both Russia and Ukraine and was a longtime Manafort employee. Kalimnik had direct and close access to Yanukovych and his senior entourage, and he facilitated communications between Manafort and his clients, including Yanukovych and multiple Ukrainian oligarchs. Kalimnik also maintained a relationship with Deripaska's deputy, Viktor Boyarkin, a Russian national who previously served in the defense attaché office of the Russian embassy to the United States. Manafort told the Mueller prosecutor's office that he did not believe Kalimnik was working as a Russian spy. The FBI, however, assesses that Kalimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. Several pieces of the office's evidence, including witness interviews and emails obtained through court-authorized search warrants, support that assessment. And then there's a series of bullet points here. 1. Kalimnik was born on April 27, 1970, in Oblast, then of the Soviet Union, and attended the Military Institute of the Ministry of Defense from 87 till 1992. Sam Patton, a business partner to Kalimnik, stated that Kalimnik told him he was a translator in the Russian army for 7 years, and that he later worked in the Russian armament industry selling arms and military equipment. U.S. government visa records, another bullet point, revealed that Kalimnik obtained a visa to travel to the United States with a Russian diplomatic passport in 1997. Another bullet. Kalimnik worked with the International Republican Institute's IRI Moscow office, where he did translation work and generally office management from 1998 to 2005. While another official recalled the incident differently, one former associate of Kalimnik's at IRI told the FBI that Kalimnik was fired from his post because his links to Russian intelligence were too strong. That same individual stated that it was well known that at IRI that Kalimnik had links to the Russian government. Another bullet. Jonathan Hawker, a British national who is a public relations consultant at FTI Consulting, worked with DMI on a public relations campaign for Yanukovych. After Hawker's work for DMI ended, Kalimnik contacted Hawker about working for a Russian government entity on a public relations project that would promote in Western and Ukrainian media Russia's position on its 2014 invasion of Crimea. And the last bullet point, Gates suspected that Kalimnik was a spy, a view that he shared with Manafort, Hawker, and Alexander Vanderswan, an attorney who had worked with DMI on a report for the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The next paragraph has been deleted by Bill Barr. B, contacts during Paul Manafort's time with the Trump campaign. Subset, Paul Manafort joins the campaign. Manafort served on the Trump campaign from late March to August 19, 2016. On March 29, 2016, the campaign announced that Manafort would serve as the campaign's convention manager. On May 19, 2016, Manafort was promoted to campaign chairman and chief strategist, and Gates, who had been assisting Manafort on the campaign, was appointed deputy campaign chairman. Thomas Barak and Roger Stone both recommended Manafort to candidate Trump. In early 2016, at Manafort's request, Barak suggested to Trump that Manafort join the campaign to manage the Republican convention. Stone had worked with Manafort from approximately 1980 until the mid-1990s through various consulting and lobbying firms. Manafort met Trump in 1982 when Trump hired the Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly lobbying firm. Over the years, Manafort saw Trump at political and social events in New York City and at Stone's wedding, and Trump requested VIP status at the 1998 and 1996 Republican conventions worked by Manafort. That's interesting. 1988, the 1988 convention and 96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We just put up a new special You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and get signed up for the newsletter.
Thom Hartmann here with you. Just looking through our Twitter feed here, a lot of folks saying, basically, vote blue no matter who, 2020. That's the hashtag, and I'm with it. I am totally. We have an existential threat to our democracy here. Clint in St. Peters, Missouri. Hey, Clint, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. So in regards to the candidates and the issues, I really like Bernie, of course, and Elizabeth Warren. But I'll tell you what, I read, I think it was a book club book for you. It's Time to Fight Dirty by, I think his name is David Ferris. And, man, I think the number one issue for every progressive should be to expand progressive majority for the future. And that includes adding 2 states to the Senate, D.C. and Puerto Rico. That would give us 4 liberal senators. Moving the cap on the Congress, that'll basically guarantee a liberal Congress for another generation, giving the filibuster. And I'd really like to see you include that in your questioning when you have a candidate on the air. I think that the more we can talk about that, the more support we can get behind that on the grassroots level.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much. Caesar in Chicago. Hey, Caesar, what's up? Or is this Cesar?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Thank you for taking my call. First of all, I think that we have a good team of qualified candidates for president on the Democratic ticket. I don't believe any one person has a monopoly on good ideas or suggestions, you know. And that being said, my first choice, and I don't have a second one or two because I think there are a lot of good people there. My first choice is Julian Castro. And I'll give you 3 reasons. 1, he's a progressive. If he wasn't a progressive, he wouldn't even be considered.
Right. 2,
as an administrator of both the major city San Antonio and Secretary of HUD, he's had a very good record. No scandals and a number of achievements.
Right, and he knows how to run a large agency, which is what the president has to do. And that's obviously something Trump doesn't know how to do. He ran a little family business with 7 employees.
100% with you there. And lastly, he was the first and the one who came up with the most direct and comprehensive approach to the whole refugee crisis in Central America. His quote-unquote Marshall Plan, while it needs to be, looked at and taken down research, that is the approach we need to take if we are serious about resolving the refugee crisis in Central America. Anything else, is short-term thinking, and it's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think he's a solid guy, and he's got some excellent plans. Thank you, Caesar. It's great to hear from you. Thank you. Gloria in Shannon, North Carolina. Gloria, your thoughts?
Yeah, Tom. I'm with everybody else. Vote blue no matter who. But what I wanted to put out to everybody is to be diligent with your whoever you choose. after the debate last week, for some reason, I don't know who is doing it or what, but billboards, TV commercials, TV ads, and radio ads in the works started popping up for Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, billboards with every corner practically. My husband said he works on the ports the port of Charleston in South Carolina. He said that you can't turn a corner without some kind of billboard or poster of Tulsi Gabbard, and all over South Carolina and the southern parts of North Carolina.
That's
interesting. And they're moving on up. And
she goes on Fox News a lot. I wonder if there's like a right-wing contingent that likes her.
I was about to say, I've been trying to investigate the group that's posted them, and I'm having a time finding anything on them.
Yeah,
and that kind of worries me too.
Yeah.
But as far as Tulsi concerned, I'm not going to say I don't like her, but it's just just be careful. That's what I'm telling everybody to look careful into anybody that you back.
Yeah. That said, right now, she's saying and doing, I think, a lot of the right things in the campaign, and so I don't want to be just dissing her, but I know that there's the Drudge poll said that she had won, and then it turns out that there was actually some sort of a right-wing funded campaign to make that happen. And I don't know why. I can speculate about why, but frankly, I don't want to, because I don't want to turn this into anything that is
I understand
taking
that.
a bite out of our Democrats. So, who are your favorites, Gloria?
My favorite is Elizabeth Warren, especially, and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
But I know 2 women won't get on the ticket. I would love to see that, but I know 2 women won't.
Well, you're probably the 20th person who said that to me. We've had 2 men on the ticket forever. I mean, 2 women.
Yeah, and it would be nice if we had 2 women on the ticket. But Kamala, if it was me, my dream ticket is Elizabeth and Kamala.
Yeah, I think that ticket actually has as much, I think they have a good side. If that was the ticket, I think they could beat Donald Trump. I really do. And, I mean, there's a lot of other good tickets that could too, but I get it. Gloria, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your stories with us. Nancy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Nancy, your thoughts?
Hi. So vote blue no matter who. I was a Bernie supporter in 2016, but Hillary Clinton was like the most qualified candidate I've ever seen, so I had no problem voting for her.
Yep.
And for this one, Elizabeth Warren sounds like the last person. Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are my top 2. And I like Mayor Pete a lot. I was actually a little surprised that you were talking about how it was all about whether the gay people were supporting him.
Well, he just had huge fundraising numbers. I think he raised like $28 million, which is just a mind-boggling amount of money. And like I said, we saw this same thing back in 2007 as then Senator Obama was coming on the stage, and the question was, can he break out beyond the black vote, or the people of color supporting him? And excuse me, sure enough, he did. Pardon me. And so that now the question is, where is Pete? Has he already hit the mainstream? I think he has, frankly. But I'm sorry. Back to you, Nancy.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think of him as a gay candidate. I think of him as he's probably too young, too inexperienced, but I like him. And my other thought was, I really think we need to win the Senate. So if Beto or Julian Castro, I like them both, but they're not getting much traction. I think that one or both should drop out and get that Senate seat.
Yeah.
But when they don't get traction, I'm not saying they should drop out now. But
well, it's gonna turn on fundraising and on polling. I mean, that's and small fundraising, not the big fundraising. So I think that's a good thing. Nancy, thanks for sharing your preferences with us and your thoughts. Jeanette in Spirit Lake, Idaho. Hey, Jeanette, your mind? What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks. So my choices are Bernie and Tulsi. I think, it's about trust, and I think they're both true progressives. I actually take question, I think some of these candidates, you have to look at where their money's coming from. But I think it kind of comes down to, why nominate a neoliberal or a centrist trying to sound like a progressive, and you can get the real thing. You know, I mean, it's just like when the Dems run a blue dog against a Republican, the Republican wins every time. You know, we can trust Bernie. You know, everyone is trying to emulate him. Why would you not take the original? You know,
right?
And Tulsi to stay progressive once you're elected. You know, I mean, that to me is who's gonna do that? You know, Tulsi, I think, is awesome. She had the guts to stand up to the DNC. You know, I mean, questioning where her support is coming from. I don't think, you know, she's so anti-war. I don't think the military-industrial complex supported Republicans are really pushing her. I think there's a strong anti-war contingent.
That may well be. That may well be.
And many of us, you know, a little bit further to the left. I'm not, you know, I mean, you know, far left is not where any of us are, but, you know, Tulsi has strong support there. You know, I think she's her military background, her youth make her even stronger. You know, and what happens, you know, once they get into office? That's what you were kind of asking about earlier. You know, what are they going to be able to do? And you know, and that's Bernie's strongest message is, you know, we have to get past the corporate media. We have to get past the establishment. We have to mobilize. If people don't stand up, nothing's going to happen. And if we don't take the Senate, you know, I mean, he's not going to be able to do what he wants to do. You know, everything within this progressive vision, you know, stems on getting the people in office that are willing to do that, like AOC. And if you don't have somebody like Bernie, and Tulsi has the support too, that's why you're seeing those billboards everywhere, and that's why so many of us are mentioning Tulsi. If you don't have somebody that excites people like Bernie does, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're not going to.
Tulsi Gabbard also was, you know, I think she was one of the very first members of the House of Representatives to come out in support of Bernie back 4 years ago. And that may be why a lot of people are kind of tying the two of them together. We'll see. Jeanette, thank you for your call, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Bob Ney with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes as well, so stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? I'd like to ask you a question about FDR's New Deal, but before I begin, you know, I just want to say I'm not being paid by any right-wing think tank. Those numbers, I had never heard of the American Action Forum, so that was just the first Google result about the Green New Deal. But my question is, so, you know, I admire what he did during the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt, you know, he spent money using, you know, Keynes' demand-side economics to put people back to work to create demand in the economy. So my question is, what should the percentage, you know, what should the government spending as a percentage of the gross domestic product be, or how much do we spend to do that without running into the problem of hyperinflation? That's my question.
Well, hyperinflation comes about as a consequence. There's two ways that you can create hyperinflation. The first is by debasing your currency, by printing more dollars than you need, basically. And that's never going to happen in the United States. And that has never happened in any developed country. That's what happened in Zimbabwe, right? That's what happened in Germany after World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles imposed this huge punishing fine, basically, on Germany, where Germany had to pay, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars of Deutschmarks in order to satisfy the Treaty of Versailles. And so, you know, they intentionally debased their currency because the amount was specified in the treaty, as I recall. And so they could pay off that treaty with dollars that were worth pennies, if that makes sense. But the main way that you have inflation, the way that we had inflation in the United States in the 1970s, for example, and there have been 2 or 3 times in our history where we've had inflation as a consequence of this, is when a commodity that is absolutely essential to the economy becomes unavailable and or is lost in its availability. Typically in other countries, that's food. In the United States in the 70s, it was oil. And so when a commodity that you can't have a country work without becomes scarce,
the price of that commodity goes up. The price of that commodity going up drives up the price of everything else, particularly if that commodity is associated with everything else. In other words, you can't live if you don't have food. You can't have an economy that functions if you don't have oil, at least, because we haven't made the conversion to solar. And so government spending is not what produces inflation, unless it's so great that, like I said, it debases the currency. And that has never happened in the history of the United States, and I don't think it ever will. So the larger question then, Dennis, becomes how much of the economy do you want the government to be? In Canada, the government is almost 40% of the economy. In the United States, it's about 20%. Why? Because in Canada, the government pays for the healthcare system. It doesn't run it, but it pays for it. And the Canadians, and by the way, this is true of most European countries. Most European countries, what you find is that the government sector is between 30 and 40% of total economic activity, whereas in the United States, it's around 20%. If you're simply shifting healthcare expenses from for-profit companies that are skimming hundreds of billions of dollars in profit off the top for their rich buddies and move that to government, it's not only not going to create inflation, it's actually going to lower prices, and it's going to save the entire economy money, even though you've moved it out of the private sector and into the public sector. That's meaningless in terms of whether or not you have inflation. It's not more dollars chasing fewer goods or fewer goods being chased by more dollars, deflation or inflation. So there's not a magic number. It's like, what do you think the government should do? Thanks, Dennis. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Loving What You Do. Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us is the former Ohio congressman and author of the book Sideswiped, Bob Ney. And Bob, welcome back. What's at the top of the news in your mind today?
Well, thank you, Tom. The top of the news is a bit of a change. We don't know how dramatic yet or how dangerous, let me put it that way, and it's with Huawei, which is the Chinese major conglomerate company. And as we all know, at one point in time, President Trump had put sanctions on Huawei, and it was in the interest of national security.
Right.
Now, yesterday...
Now, if I could just interrupt you for people who don't know what we're talking about, Huawei not only is I believe, the second largest manufacturer of cell phones in the world, but also they make the equipment that run cell phone towers, and they're the leading manufacturer of that for 5G networks. And the concern is that because Huawei was launched with government money in China and has a really, really tight association with the Chinese military, that they may be spying on everybody who has a Huawei phone, or they may be spying on any telephone traffic and data traffic that goes through, cell phone tower networks that are using Huawei equipment. Back to you, Bob.
Oh, yes, and that's a perfect description of it. And there is a fear, although Huawei phones are not used here extensively, they are used extensively in Europe and Canada. And there is a fear that the devices inherent in those phones, of course, just like you said, can be used for spying purposes. So in the interest of national security, the president made a big deal about it. Well, now, I wish I could give you more details, but we don't know more details yet. But the president said, well, certain items that are provided from the United States to Huawei for the productions of those phones, chips, etc., certain items, he said, they may or they will let continue, but we don't know what they will let continue. Let me put it that way. And I know that sounds confusing, but this is sort of an erratic announcement yesterday of what's really a reversal. So Senator Warner had made a statement, and Senator Warner on the Democratic side had said, look, this is interest of national security. Remember that. And to dovetail, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, came out and said that there will be a pushback on this if, in fact, it breaches some type of national security interest.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but when Trump first came out and pointed this out, he was right. And now it looks like he caved to Chinese President Xi over at the G20, because this was a big deal for Xi. So Xi probably sat down with him and said, hey, cut back on the sanctions on Huawei. And Trump was like, yes, sir, as you say, sir. May I have another, sir? Anyway.
Yes, well, you're right. The art of the deal may be the art of China winning the espionage game.
Yep.
And here's the problem with this. Now, with doing this, and well, let me just say, first of all, the trade issue with China, I think on itself, people who want fair trade in this country, they like the fact there's a pushback to China. That's always been inherent amongst a lot of workers, a lot of union members, and a lot of blue-collar workers.
Democrats and Republicans.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, here's the problem, though. If we begin now as a government to equate interests of trade and cutting deals with interests that other countries have on technology, that violates the aspect of trying to do trade deals. Now, this is mixing apples and oranges, and it's not healthy at all, because then that's deal cutting with other issues that aren't actually involved with trade. And
do you think this is because Trump just wants, a positive news cycle? He just wants to goose the stock market, and he doesn't really understand all these issues in any kind of depth?
Well, yes, Tom, because even though I love anybody that goes after China. Look, I was a Bernie Sanders guy in Congress on trade, right? So I really like that aspect. However, the problem is when you go after something and you want a deal, you want a good deal, and a fairly clean deal. And so I think with the president, it's the art of the deal, and it doesn't matter particularly, to Hades with the details, because as long as there is a, quote, deal, because Tom, and I know, if there's a deal, it's going to be the best deal ever seen in America's history.
That's how he will sell it, yeah. In other words, he just wants a deal. He doesn't care if it helps or hurts the United States, which is really a tragedy.
Well, and same thing with the Iranians. It's been announced by the Iranians that they're now going to exceed 300 kilograms, and that's with the uranium.
Right. They officially did, actually, yesterday, I think it was. Yeah.
And they've done it. And they're trying to get some type of concession, obviously, out of Europe, because they were kicked out of the deal with America. But yet the president doesn't say, there has to be a precondition, which he originally said with the Iranians. He's dropped all that. Now he just wants to sit down, which is interesting, although I think there ought to be a nuclear deal. It would be fascinating if the Iranians would sit down, which they won't now, but it would be fascinating to see what actually they'd ask for and how much he would actually give them to get, quote, a deal. Because then he would have Kim Jong-un, he would have the new NAFTA deal, and then he would have Iran as a deal, and China. And that completes his cycle of, hey, I cut the deals, I held to the promise I said I would make. And the unfortunate part of this too, Tom, with China, if he does cut a deal, and we have a giveaway that has nothing to do with trade, like Huawei, but if he does cut a deal, we're not going to know until after the election the effectiveness economically even of that deal. It's only the word that we're told.
Wow. Okay.
Sure.
So what else is up, Bob?
Well, looking with interest with the Kamala Harris tweet by Donald Trump Jr. concerning Senator Harris, which was just bizarre that he put it out. He did delete the tweet, but it was from an alt-right group. And it was interesting, and I was telling a consultant today that called and asked me about it, and I said, it's very interesting. When he says that he put that tweet out about her racial mixture, whether she was truly black, and about the Indian parts, South Asian Indian, not American Native Indian, of her ancestry. And he said, he was just asking the question. Well, he's in the White House. You can pick up a phone if you're in the White House or Congress, and you get any question answered you want. You don't have to tweet it out, repeating an alt-right tweet.
We saw the same thing when Obama was running, where the alt-right and the Russian, I don't know if it was the Russians at the time, but there were people saying, but he's got a white mother, he's not really, and his father came from Nigeria, so he doesn't really understand the American black experience. These were purely attempts to divide the black community against a person of color, against a candidate who really they should want, and they do want to embrace. I think
they fear her a bit.
I think they do too. I think the Republicans fear Kamala Harris, and I think it's despicable what they're doing. Thank you, Bob.
Right. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
It's the Mueller Report. We're reading from page 131. This is under the title of Paul Manafort's Ties to Russia and Ukraine and the subtitle of Oleg Deripaska Consulting Work. In 2017, Deripaska invested through another entity in Pericles Emerging Market Partners, LP, also known as Pericles, an investment fund created by Manafort and former Manafort business partner Richard Davis. The Pericles Fund was established to pursue investments in Eastern Europe. Deripaska was the sole investor. Gates stated in interviews with the office that the venture led to a deterioration of the relationship between Manafort and Deripaska. In particular, when the fund failed, litigation between Manafort and Deripaska ensued. Gates stated that by 2009, Manafort's business relationship with Deripaska had, quote, dried up. According to Gates, various interactions with Deripaska and his intermediaries over the past few years have involved trying to resolve the legal dispute. As described below, in 2016, Manafort, Gates, Kilimnik, and others engaged in efforts to revive the Deripaska relationship and resolve the litigation. Political consulting work. Through Deripaska, Manafort was introduced to Ronit Akhmenatov, a Ukrainian oligarch who hired Manafort as a political consultant. In 2005, Akhmenatov hired Manafort to engage in political work supporting the Party of Regions, a political party in Ukraine that was generally understood to align with Russia. Manafort assisted the Party of Regions in regaining power, and its candidate, Viktor Yanukovych, won the presidency in 2010. Manafort became a close and trusted political advisor to Yanukovych during his time as president of Ukraine. Yanukovych served in that role until 2014 when he fled to Russia amidst popular protests. Konstantin Kilimnik. Kilimnik is a Russian national who has lived in both Russia and Ukraine and was a longtime Manafort employee. Kilimnik had direct and close access to Yanukovych and his senior entourage, and he facilitated communications between Manafort and his clients, including Yanukovych and multiple Ukrainian oligarchs. Kilimnik also maintained a relationship with Deripaska's deputy, Viktor Boyarkin, a Russian national who previously served in the defense attaché office of the Russian embassy to the United States. Manafort told the Mueller prosecutor's office that he did not believe Kilimnik was working as a Russian spy. The FBI, however, assesses that Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. Several pieces of the office's evidence, including witness interviews and emails obtained through court-authorized search warrants, support that assessment. And then there's a series of bullet points here. 1. Kilimnik was born on April 27, 1970, in Oblast, then of the Soviet Union, and attended the Military Institute of the Ministry of Defense from 87 till 1992. Sam Patton, a business partner to Kilimnik, stated that Kilimnik told him he was a translator in the Russian army for 7 years, and that he later worked in the Russian armament industry selling arms and military equipment. U.S. government visa records, another bullet point, revealed that Kilimnik obtained a visa to travel to the United States with a Russian diplomatic passport in 1997. Another bullet. Kilimnik worked with the International Republican Institute's, IRI, Moscow office, where he did translation work and generally office management from 1998 to 2005. While another official recalled the incident differently, one former associate of Kilimnik's at IRI told the FBI that Kilimnik was fired from his post because his links to Russian intelligence were too strong. That same individual stated that it was well known that at IRI that Kilimnik had links to the Russian government. Another bullet. Jonathan Hawker, a British national who is a public relations consultant at FTI Consulting, worked with DMI on a public relations campaign for Yanukovych. After Hawker's work for DMI ended, Kilimnik contacted Hawker about working for a Russian government entity on a public relations project that would promote in Western and Ukrainian media Russia's position on its 2014 invasion of Crimea. And the last bullet point, Gates suspected that Kilimnik was a spy, a view that he shared with Manafort, Hawker, and Alexander Vanderswan, an attorney who had worked with DMI on a report for the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The next paragraph has been deleted by Bill Barr. B, contacts during Paul Manafort's time with the Trump campaign. Subset, Paul Manafort joins the campaign. Manafort served on the Trump campaign from late March to August 19, 2016. On March 29, 2016, the campaign announced that Manafort would serve as the campaign's convention manager. On May 19, 2016, Manafort was promoted to campaign chairman and chief strategist, and Gates, who had been assisting Manafort on the campaign, was appointed deputy campaign chairman. Thomas Barak and Roger Stone both recommended Manafort to candidate Trump. In early 2016, at Manafort's request, Barak suggested to Trump that Manafort join the campaign to manage the Republican convention. Stone had worked with Manafort from approximately 1980 until the mid-1990s through various consulting and lobbying firms. Manafort met Trump in 1982 when Trump hired the Black Manafort, Stone and Kelly lobbying firm. Over the years, Manafort saw Trump at political and social events in New York City and at Stone's wedding, and Trump requested VIP status at the 1998 and 1996 Republican conventions worked by Manafort. That's interesting. The 1988 convention and 96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. The Mueller Report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've been talking about what happens if the economy goes down. Will it flip us fascist? Will it flip us back to FDR demand-side economics, what we had prior to 1981? Will it strengthen this sort of corporate-run, middle kind of politics? Where do we go with this? We've been talking about who are, if your number one candidate doesn't make it, who's your number two and number three? I'm trying to get a sense of how people feel about the field. I know, because Bernie was on our program for 11 years, every single Friday answering questions from callers for an hour. There's a lot of Bernie supporters who listen to this program. I get that. But if he doesn't make it, who would be number two or who would be number three? Or if you're a Liz Warren supporter, who would be number two or number three? Or Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg or Marianne Williamson or, Andrew Yang or, pick your whoever. We earlier last week we were saying, who's number one on your list. Now I'm saying, I'm really more interested in who's number two or three. I'm trying to get a sense of how this field is forming. And so anyway, we talked about that. We talked about the treatment of mass migrants likely meeting the definition of mass atrocity. And Laura Bush, the wife of a war criminal, coming out and saying that what Donald Trump is doing is a crime, is wrong. She says it's eerily reminiscent of interning the Japanese, which she says now has been considered one of the most shameful episodes in U.S. history. She said our government should not be in the business of warehousing children. And, wow, Laura Bush, of all people. But in this third hour here, I want to get into this question that Michael Tomasky writes about in today's New York Times. He asks this question in the headline. And I think it's something that we really need to grapple with and is getting virtually no coverage in the electronic media, and no honest or serious discussion anywhere that I can find, and frankly has not even been brought up once in the Democratic primaries
or at least in the Democratic debates, and I think should become part of the Democratic debates. And the question is, do the Republicans even believe in democracy anymore? It seems to me that what has happened here with the Republican Party is that it has become a faction of billionaires. I mean, this is billionaires, white racists or frightened white people, and misogynist people, and that's kind of it. Nixon started this with his Southern Strategy in 1972 or 1968 rather. The Southern Strategy, and then it got amplified in a big way, with Reagan and, bringing in the billionaires and saying, okay, the Republican Party is now officially the party of the very, very, very rich, or at least the right-wing very rich who are willing to support it. That's now the Republican Party. But that wasn't quite enough, and so they brought in the anti-abortion folks. They bought the fundamentalist Christian, particularly the TV preachers, the guys, hey, I need $54 million to buy a new jet. God told me that. Bringing those people and their followers in, and bringing in the people who are afraid that the jackbooted thugs from the government are going to come and take their guns. And they've cobbled together this weird coalition that even in sum total is not enough to win elections. And so instead what they're doing is massive voter suppression. Their billionaires are coming in with massive campaigns filled with lies. The example, I talked about this in the first hour briefly, living here in Portland, Oregon, and it's great to be back home, by the way, and back in my own studio. Although I had a great time on the road, and thanks again, tip of the hat to all the great folks at our various affiliated radio stations who hosted me during the book tour. But the Republican Party has basically put this thing together where they're saying, what we're all about now is suppressing the vote, aggressive gerrymandering. We saw in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, states controlled by Republicans, just prior to the 2016 election, you saw hundreds of thousands of people, of legitimate voters, largely African American and Hispanic and Asian, removed from the voting rolls. You saw the same thing, over 1 million people removed from the voting rolls in Georgia when Stacey Abrams was on the ballot. The result, of course, was that the Republican ended up winning. Republicans increasingly are relying on structural stuff. In North Carolina, for example, the vote in North Carolina is about 50-50 in terms of who they want representing them in the U.S. House of Representatives. And North Carolina has, as I recall, 13 members of Congress. I might be off on that, but basically they're ending up with 9 or 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats with a 50-50 vote because of gerrymandering. And then the Supreme Court last week said, political gerrymandering is just fine. Racial gerrymandering, no, you can't do that, but political gerrymandering, just fine. So they're just going to start using the language of politics rather than the language of race to do the exact same thing, knowing that there are political divisions that are also racial divisions. I mean, John Roberts and the right-wingers on the court just opened the door. And so now you're going to see hundreds of frankly, I think it's going to be billions of dollars, not hundreds of billions, but I think it's going to be probably over $1 billion in this election cycle being poured into state legislatures and state governors' races, because whatever party is in power after the 2020 election, because of the census, this is in the Constitution, every 10 years you take a census, and then in the following year or two, based on that census, you redraw your congressional districts so that they reflect where people have moved to or where people have moved from. Places that have fewer people, they have to, expand or change their, people who have more, places that have more. And states that actually gain or lose population overall can actually gain or lose a congressional seat. Now, of course, the citizenship question was designed to really whack the states that have a lot of Hispanics in them. But, the Supreme Court threw that out, although I think a lot of the damage has already been done. But this goes even beyond that. So we've got this extreme gerrymandering that's going on. None of this stuff has anything to do with democracy. And I think the reason why is because the Republicans have literally no plan for America. They want to do away with Medicare. They want to do away with Social Security. They've been singing that song since the 1930s about Social Security, since the 1960s about Medicare and Medicaid. They just don't, they think it's socialism. They don't think it's the government's role. There's very few Republicans who will just come right out and tell you this, but this is how they all vote. And what they're saying, they want to privatize Social Security so that $2.5 trillion trust fund will go to the big banks in New York who fund Republican campaigns. They want to completely privatize our healthcare system and do away with Medicare and Medicaid so that the multi-billion-dollar health insurance companies that give big money to the Republican candidates will get more. And the story I was telling earlier in the show was because we live here in Portland, we get ads for Washington State because one of the largest cities in Washington State, Vancouver, is literally right across the river from us. You cross the bridge between, over the Columbia River between Portland and Vancouver, and you go from Oregon to Washington. So in the Portland television market and radio market, you're getting ads that are being paid for by groups in Washington State. Well, Jay Inslee 2 years ago got a carbon tax on the ballot. And it was very popular when it was first put on the ballot. And then the fossil fuel industry came in and they dug up this old former Republican, I believe he was the Secretary of State, who looks and talks like Mr. Rogers. He just seems like the sweetest guy around. And in the ads, he never mentions the fact that he was the Republican Secretary of State. And he says, this carbon tax is just going to destroy the economy of the state of Washington. People are going to lose jobs because of this carbon tax. Well, in fact, that was not the case. It would actually create jobs. It would create a lot of jobs. And it wasn't going to raise the cost of living for Washingtonians. A lot of it was going to be refunded right back to them, particularly people who drive a lot. But because these dark money, these corporations were able, because of the Supreme Court rulings, particularly Citizens United, they were able to pour millions and millions of dollars into this. And the good government folks, people like you and me, were like, I think I saw 3 ads in favor of the carbon tax, and every single hour, every ad block had this, Mr. Rogers guy telling the people of Washington, be afraid, be very afraid. And of course, it went down in flames. And then you get Chuck Todd on NBC saying to Jay Inslee, well, your own state voted down your policies. Well, no, I mean, it's yes, that's what happened, but it wasn't because the state didn't like their policies. It was because a former Republican and a bunch of oil companies lied through their friggin' teeth to people, with millions and millions of dollars. I think it was a $20 million, ad buy. So how do we deal with this if you've got an entire political party representing about half the political spectrum that literally doesn't believe in democracy? That thinks that, they're the only way that they can win, because they have no good ideas, because the ideas that they do have are largely hated by the American people. They want to destroy labor unions, destroy the labor movement. They want to keep the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. It's never been, we've never had a period of time as long as right now during which the minimum wage was not increased. This is the longest stretch ever. Why? Because Republicans. And you've got, an absolutely immoral guy, Mitch McConnell, who stole a Supreme Court seat from our nation's first black president. And now the court is handing down these decisions like saying, oh, yeah, gerrymandering, that's just fine. So how do we deal with this? In his article, Michael Tomasky, he talks about this thing called competitive authoritarianism. He says, is there a middle ground? It was written by the Stephen Levitsky, who also wrote How Democracies Die. And the competitive authoritarianism, it's civilian regimes in which formal democratic institutions exist and are widely viewed as the primary means of gaining power, but in which incumbents' abuse of the state places them at a significant advantage vis-a-vis their opponents. And he said, and he talks about how this has happened in Mozambique, in Kenya, in Cameroon, in Taiwan, in Malaysia, in Cambodia, in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. All of these states have basically lost their democracy and become these kind of quasi-semi-authoritarian states. And this is the direction the Republican Party is pushing us. What do we do about this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And how do we make this a larger part of our dialogue? I also want to talk about how Trump is openly helping tyrants around the world. And welcome back. Susan in Alachua, Florida. Hey, Susan, thanks for watching us on Free Speech via Roku. What's up?
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to let you know that I am yearning for an FDR-type president.
Yeah, me too.
And I think Elizabeth Warren would be that person. If not her, then Kamala Harris. But I really think that we need to go back to big government. Mm-hmm. I think government has to be first and foremost, and the Republicans don't want to have anything to do with government. They're just being bought off by millionaires. So
yeah.
That's my thought.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for Susan for saying it so elegantly. Todd in Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Todd, what's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I'll take this off speaker. Hang on a second. Well, I, like many others, want the most progressive candidate. And right now, that's probably Bernie or Elizabeth or... there's a lot of good ones. But
well, who's your number three? Because
yeah, that's what I was going to get to. I just don't want Jay Inslee to get lost in the discussion. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't even think it's arguable, but the most important issue right now has got to be climate change, and he's the only one talking about it. And
he's not the only one talking about it. I think pretty much all of them are talking about it, but he's the only one who has focused his entire campaign on it.
Right, he's made it part of his platform.
Yeah,
and it's my dream that he would be the number two, mm-hmm. and whoever's president would put him in charge. That would be his mission.
Yeah,
and I think he'd make a great number two.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's up?
You know, it's pretty obvious it's going on with the Republicans. They don't follow the program. You've got they're going to bring up that whole guns, gods, and gay routine again. There's no question about that. You've got Fox News, the NRA, Rush Limbaugh, the Republican hierarchy. They understand the ignorance of their voter base. The Democrats won't admit to that. And if there's enough Democrats out there, millions of them who actually understand what's going on, many of them aren't voting. You see what I mean? And obviously that's a lot of the millennials, too. You know, that's the scary situation. The media is in control now. And one simple question I have to ask you, Tom, is it kind of sums the whole situation up. How many fund drives to keep his radio show on the air does Rush Limbaugh have to do?
Right. Yeah. Good
See
point.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And on our commercial stations, we don't do fund drives. We're commercial like RushLimbaugh. But yeah, you're watching Free Speech TV.
I mean, in general.
And our nonprofit stations, and God bless them. Right. You know. But you're right. And in fact, there was an article that in Politico a couple of years ago that just laid out that Rush Limbaugh is getting a multi-million-dollar subsidy every year. At least he was at the time the article was written, and had for many, many years, via the Heritage Foundation, as was Sean Hannity, as was Michael Savage, and that all keeps them going, goes right to the bottom line. And here we get not one penny from any rich billionaire. Tim,
I just wish more people understood that.
Yeah, I do too. Tim, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. And actually, I want to get into this conversation about Trump helping, what is liberal democracy? What does that mean? And why does Trump not understand it? And why is he aligning himself with Vladimir Putin on this? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Malcolm Nance was talking about this over the weekend. He said, and he pointed out that President Putin of Russia gave a speech in which he said liberal democracy is dying and is obsolete, I think is the word he used. And by liberal democracy, he's not talking about Bernie Sanders. He's not talking about liberals. He's talking about what the framers of the Constitution created in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. That was what he was talking about. The United States of America, we're a liberal democracy. The European countries that are members of the European Union, liberal democracies. The UK, if they split from the EU, liberal democracy. Australia, liberal democracy. And basically suggesting that liberal democracies are toast and can and should be replaced by largely autocratic governments. Governments that meet the definition of a merger of state and corporate interests or state and billionaire interests, along with belligerent nationalism. And Donald Trump agreed with that. And this is what Malcolm Nance said. He said there's the United States of America and then there's Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is a wannabe autocrat. The United States has now an official policy of Donald Trump's government has abandoned liberal democracy, which was formed in the building right behind me at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Trump does not believe it. To say that it's the end of multiculturalism is to say it's the end of the United States of America. This is, this American democracy that Donald Trump says he wants to destroy. And he's come out and said it now. I mean, essentially, Putin was right about liberal democracy. Now, I think most people, the media is treating it like, oh, Trump doesn't know the difference between liberal democracy, as you learn in civics, and liberals, right? And that may be true. But frankly, if you look at his actions, he doesn't believe in liberal democracy as the founders came up with either. And these are serious threats. I mean, we've had a liberal democracy for 244 years, and Donald Trump wants to destroy that. And in the meantime, he's sucking up to all these dictators. Tucker Carlson came up with, this is the latest, this bizarre new, I don't even know the word, excuse, I guess, for Donald Trump doing a photo op with Kim Jong-un in North Korea instead of actually any kind of policy. This is what Tucker Carlson said. He said, you got to be honest about what it means to lead a country. It means killing people. Really? Is he talking about the death penalty? No, I don't. He says, not on the scale that the North Koreans do, but a lot of countries commit atrocities, including a number that we're closely allied with. Well, yeah, that's true of Saudi Arabia. I'm with you. You've got apartheid governments that we support. You've got violent dictatorships that we support. But instead of saying, yeah, we do that, and therefore we should suck up to North Korea, as Tucker Carlson and Fox News are saying, I ask the question, why are we supporting these countries? Why are we in bed with Saudi Arabia? Why are we not encouraging Israel to come to some sort of a reconciliation with the Palestinians so they can end apartheid? Why are we supporting Duterte in murdering people just because they're drug users? Why are we supporting El-Sisi, a military coup? Why are we supporting these anti-democratic movements around the world? I think, frankly, Richard Engel said, one of the reasons that Kim in North Korea loves Donald Trump is because Trump has no moral center, basically. Yeah, amen. So how do we deal with this? What do we do about this? Well, obviously, we need to change who's in the White House.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And obviously, we do that. Well, you've got impeachment as well. But, clearly, we've got to do something coming up in 2020. You've got to get people out to vote. It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 110. This is about the June 9th, 2016 meeting at Trump Tower. The Russian attorney who spoke at the meeting, Natalia Veselnitskaya, had previously worked for the Russian government and maintained a relationship with that government throughout this period of time. She claimed that funds derived from illegal activities in Russia were provided to Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. Trump Jr. requested evidence to support those claims, but Veselnitskaya did not provide such information. She and her associates then turned to a critique of the origins of the Magnitsky Act, a 2012 statute
that imposed financial and travel sanctions on Russian officials and that resulted in a retaliatory ban on adoptions of Russian children. Trump Jr. suggested that the issue could be revisited when and if candidate Trump was elected. After the election, Veselnitskaya made additional efforts to follow up on the meeting, but the Trump transition team did not engage. Sub A, setting up the June 9 meeting. Sub I, outreach to Donald Trump Jr. Aras Agalarov is a Russian real estate developer with ties to Putin and other members of the Russian government, including Russia's Prosecutor General Yuri Chaika. Aras Agalarov is the president of the Crocus Group, a Russian enterprise that holds substantial Russian government construction contracts and, as discussed above, worked with Trump in connection with the 2013 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow and a potential Trump-Moscow real estate project. The relationship continued over time as the parties pursued the Trump-Moscow project in 2013-14 and exchanged gifts and letters in 2016. For example, in April 2016, Trump responded to a letter from Aras Agalarov with a handwritten note. Aras Agalarov expressed interest in Trump's campaign, passed on congratulations for winning in the primary, and according to one email drafted by Goldstone, an offer of his support and that of many of his important Russian friends and colleagues, especially in reference to U.S.-Russian relations. On June 3, 2016, Emin Agalarov called Goldstone, Emin's then publicist. Goldstone is a music and events promoter who represented Emin Agalarov from approximately late 2012 until late 2016. While representing Emin Agalarov, Goldstone facilitated the ongoing contact between the Trumps and the Agalarovs, including an invitation that Trump sent to Putin to attend the 2016 Miss Universe pageant. The rest of that is redacted by Bill Barr. Goldstone understood Russian political connection and, Goldstone understood, redacted by Bill Barr, a Russian political connection, and Emin Agalarov indicated that the attorney was a prosecutor. Goldstone recalled that the information that might interest the Trumps involved Hillary Clinton, and then the rest of the page is deleted, redacted by Bill Barr. Page 112. The top paragraph is redacted by Bill Barr. The redacted by Bill Barr, mentioned by Emin Agalarov, was Natalia Veselnitskaya. From approximately 1998 until 2001, Veselnitskaya worked as a prosecutor for the Central Administrative District of the Russian Prosecutor's Office, and she continued to perform government-related work and maintain ties to the Russian government following her departure. She lobbied and testified about the Magnitsky Act, which imposed financial sanctions and travel restrictions on Russian officials, and which was named for a Russian tax specialist who exposed a fraud and later died in a Russian prison. Putin called the statute a purely political, unfriendly act, and Russia responded by barring a list of current and former U.S. officials from entering Russia and by halting the adoption of Russian children by U.S. citizens. Veselnitskaya performed legal work for Denis Katsiev, the son of Russian businessman Peter Katsiev, and for his company Prevazon Holdings Limited, which was a defendant in a civil forfeiture action alleging the laundering of proceeds from the fraud exposed by Magnitsky. She also appears to have been involved in an April 2016 approach to a U.S. congressional delegation in Moscow offering confidential information from the Prosecutor General of Russia about interactions between certain political forces in our two countries. Shortly after his June 3rd call with Emin Agalarov, Goldstone, we're on page 113 now, Goldstone emailed Trump Jr. The email stated, "Good morning. Emin just called and asked me to contact you with something very interesting. The Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with his father, Aras, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and and her dealings with Russia, and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Aras and Emin. What do you think is the best way to handle this information, and would you be able to speak to Emin about it directly? I can also send this info to your father via Rona, but it is also ultra-sensitive, so wanted to send to you first. Best, Rob Goldstone." Within minutes of this email, Trump Jr. responded, emailing back, "Thanks, Rob, I appreciate that. I am on the road at the moment, but perhaps I just speak to Emin first. Seems we have some time, and if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Can we do a call first thing next week when I am back?" Goldstone conveyed Trump Jr.'s interest to Emin Agalarov, emailing that Trump Jr., quote, "wants to speak personally on the issue." On June 6, 2016, Emin Agalarov asked Goldstone if there was any news, and Goldstone explained that Trump Jr. was likely still traveling for the final elections, where Trump will be crowned the official nominee. On the same day, Goldstone again emailed Trump Jr. and asked whether Trump Jr. was free to talk with Emin about this Hillary info. Page 114 now. Trump Jr. asked if they could speak now, and Goldstone arranged a call between Trump Jr. and Emin Agalarov. The Mueller Report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One other thing I want to just add to this question, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Jimmy Carter just came right out and said what I think has been the subtext, basically, of the Mueller investigation and what a lot of us have been talking about ever since the election. Here's Jimmy Carter saying it himself in his own words.
He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf.
It's just that simple.
He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered.
Yeah,
on his
behalf. There you go. Donald Trump is not a legitimate president. He's an illegitimate president. And, I agree. I'll just say it out loud. I do not believe that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, fair and square or honestly or whatever, whatever the word is. And therefore, I consider him an illegitimate president. I do not consider him my president. I mentioned this last week, just briefly, but I want to just throw that into the conversation. And Nate was able to find the video of him saying that. And it was a good one. So anyhow, some of your thoughts on candidates, on the economy, on the Republican Party turning into no longer being a political party, but merely basically a power machine for billionaires and giant corporations, and the legitimacy of the Trump presidency. Ivan in DuPage, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, what's up?
Hey, what's up, Tom? You're the man.
Thank you.
Number one, Bernie. And my close second is Tulsi Gabbard. Now, let me suggest to your viewers, go on YouTube, search Tulsi Gabbard, and see dozens of her interviews. And my question to you, Tom, is why would we question the Tulsi billboards? To me, it's apparently a brilliant campaign strategy and use of limited money. There are thousands of military in North and South Carolina, and it's an early primary.
Okay, so for a person who's running basically on a campaign of I'm a veteran, I know the horrors of war, and therefore we need to be more reasonable and rational in our use of force around the world, putting up a lot of billboards around military facilities makes sense. Interesting. Okay, Ivan, thank you. Thank you very much. Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's up? Did we just lose Mike? Okay, let's try Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Paul.
Before I get to my picks here, I'll answer your question of why are we cozying up to North Korea and Saudi Arabia and Russia, because I think that's who Donald Trump has in mind to support him in is with his war in Iran, since none of the allies, our Western allies, are giving him any indication that they will.
Except Russia is an ally of Iran.
Well,
I think it's because Paul. I think it's because he thinks they're the ones who are most likely to hack voting machines on his behalf.
That maybe that too, but you look at it, really when you think about it, really could there be any bigger punks in the world than Kim Jong-un and the King and Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Vladimir Putin?
Yeah,
there aren't any bigger thug punks in the world than those guys. And as a matter of fact, when Pompeo was in Saudi Arabia the week before last, did you know that Saudi Arabia a couple months ago crucified somebody?
Yeah, they beheaded 20 some odd people and they crucified one of them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is that really who we want to be, and especially engaging against? And they'd love to be in a war against Iran, and they'd really love to set the Middle East on fire.
Yeah.
But
well, they're doing it right now in Yemen.
Yeah, exactly. So
The worst humanitarian crisis on earth right now is the bombs are made in the United States.
Correct. Yeah. So my picks are. Let's look at it this way, a little bit differently. Let's look to see what positions. We got a team of 20. There's more than one position. We don't need 20 quarterbacks on the team. And the way I look at it is, in terms of these two debates, and I call them as I see them, who's come out the best so far as a executive sort of audition for a first interview for the executive is Elizabeth Warren. Who would I put with Elizabeth Warren as a VP would be Pete Buttigieg. And I think that would be a strong ticket because in 8 years, Pete Buttigieg would be in JFK form. He's kind of young right now, but he has some great things to say. The other thing is I'd like to see, in terms of the other people, I'd like to see Kamala Harris as the Attorney General. I'd like to see Jay Inslee as the head of the EPA. I'd like to see Tulsi Gabbard as the Secretary of Defense. You know, we don't even have a Secretary of Defense right now, a kind of confirmed one.
I know.
And yeah, he's talking about going to a war with somebody. I mean, we don't even have somebody to say, we know what we don't know, we don't know what we do know, we don't know what we should know, and we don't even have a
Rumsfeld, yeah.
We don't even have a Rumsfeld to say that.
Yeah, much less anybody else.
On.
Yeah, I'm with you, Paul. I'm with you, and I think that's a great ticket, and it would make a hell of a cabinet, and I am so very, very pleased that we've got so many really great candidates. Paul, thank you. Well said, as always. Deborah in Pasco, Washington. Hey, Deborah, what's on your mind?
Hello.
Hey.
All right. So I want to talk about my picks, but before I do, I just want to say how excited I am about all the people that we have running, and the fact that so much information, I think, is just getting out to places that wouldn't even, maybe all the messages, and I'm learning so much, would even be getting out to maybe places, little nooks and crannies all over the nation, because we have so many people out there speaking to people and touching people and reaching out to people. So I'm shopping still. That's for sure.
Okay. And I'm sorry, say that again?
Hello?
Yeah, you said, it sounded to me like you said, I'm shopping steel. Who?
Yeah, I am. So who do I like? The top ones, I like Biden, I like Bernie, I like Warren. Mm-hmm. I definitely like our governor here, Inslee. I like Kamala and Julian, Buttigieg. I like all of those. I can vote, easily vote for any of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Buttigieg, some evolving where black issues are concerned, that would be important to me.
Yeah.
And, Biden needs to do some work. I agree, but I think they all have to evolve and do some work. No one's going to be expert in everything.
Yeah, I don't think there's a loser among them. And if we were to identify a candidate who is, there's some horse racing metaphor for this, the one that nobody's expecting. I would keep my eye on Bill de Blasio, too, although he,
he's forceful.
He's very forceful, and I could imagine him just taking Donald Trump apart piece by piece. And, and it may well be that he doesn't get the nomination. He doesn't even make it into the third debate, but he ends up being a very powerful person on the campaign trail. We'll see. But I was very impressed by Bill de Blasio. Thanks a lot for the call, Deborah. It's great to hear from you. Fred in Bremerton, Washington. Fred, what's on your mind?
Tom, good talking to you. I'm standing here looking at Mount Rainier.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I flew over it yesterday.
Yeah. I love living up here. Learned about the weather patterns back when I was taking flying lessons, and I realized how they travel across the United States. And I've lived in the Southeast, and I knew right then and there that the weather patterns were the weather patterns. I moved up here to the northwest corner of the United States. I'm quite glad of living up here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
I could talk, first off, Buttigieg. Where did all those donations come from? that he got after the.
I think he's breaking out into the mainstream. I think he's being viewed increasingly. I'm sure he had a lot of support in the gay community. We have, in my family, we have more than one member of the LGBT community who are very excited about Pete Buttigieg, and so I'm getting some, kind of inside on this. But and I have friends as well who are excited about him because of the fact that he's the first serious gay candidate for president in the history, openly gay in the history of the United States. The question in my mind was, will he break out beyond that? And I think he has done. I think that's what's going on right now. And just like I think Kamala Harris is breaking out beyond the communities of color. And
she's mine. She's my choice. I'd like to see her. She's got the cojones.
Yeah, she's got fire in her belly. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is the big elephant in the room. Is the guy is turning us into an autocratic state. He's trying to fuzzy the lines about what our Constitution is all about. I'm sure he's getting playbooks from people from the what we call Siberia.
Yeah.
I don't like him. I never did like him from the first words out of his mouth during his inauguration. And me being a long life.
You're talking about Mr. Rump, right? Yeah.
Sir?
Yeah, I got it. Fred, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Pam in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much. And thank you so much for what you do. I did see your film, Ice on Fire, and it was fantastic. I really highly recommend it to anybody. It actually did give me hope that there are a lot of things that we can do, but it also really highlighted that it's the global oligarchs, and Trump is part of that is keeping us from becoming more progressive.
Yep.
And to answer your question about how do we go back to a FDR presidency, I think Bernie is the only answer for that. In fact, Trevor Noah had a great quote. He said, "How can you ask Bernie to pass the torch when he invented the fire?" And he's been fighting this fight for so long, and he knows these oligarchs. I just think he'll be so strong and be able to stand up to them. That said, you've said this, and many of your callers have said this, we do have a wealth of talent in the Democratic Party, and I wish they would get together and really go after the Senate and state legislatures. I've read several articles, and you've talked about it, the Koch brothers and McConnell, rather than focusing on the presidency so much, they're focusing on the Senate and state legislatures. Yep. And I think we need to have a whole game plan, and I think Stacey Abrams would be the perfect running mate for Bernie, and I wholeheartedly agree with everybody else saying, like Tulsi Gabbard for Defense Secretary, Elizabeth Warren. I really love her ideas. She needs to stay in the Senate to write those policies that she's so well articulated. So, I'm hopeful, believe it or not.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm very aware. I mean, I wrote the book, Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And then Last Hours of Humanity, that talks about how this could be the end of human civilization and even the human race. What these games that we're playing with the climate, and yet I am hopeful too. So Pam, thank you for the call, and thank you for your very thoughtful insights there. Carol in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hey, hi Tom. I'm going to talk about Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
When she was on, she mentioned that she was in the second tranche in the busing in Berkeley.
Right.
Okay, I was living in San Francisco at the time on the campus of San Francisco State, which is a teaching school. My son was in the first tranche over in San Francisco, so I know very well what the second tranche means because we moved over to Berkeley, and he then was part of the second tranche. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is that I'm noticing that the the Republican spin machine is searching desperately to find a reason why she didn't go to Berkeley schools. There's a thing in the local newspaper about the effort to find out, to prove that she didn't go to Berkeley schools because she didn't appear in the high school yearbook at Berkeley High School.
Well, we're talking about second grade, aren't we?
Yes, of course. But I'm just telling you what the Republicans are looking for.
Oh, jeez.
So that's in the Register Guard. There's a little thing about news that didn't happen this week.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make the point that busing doesn't mean the same to everybody all over the country because they didn't experience it the same way.
Yes.
So there's a lot of reasons why Berkeley was very unique about the busing, and it's primarily the topography.
Oh, that's interesting. Carol, thank you for the call. I hope we can have a more in-depth conversation about this another time. Thank you so much. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Ed in Belfair, Washington. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, brother. Before I give you my picks, when the question was put forth to the panelists or the nominees for president, what would you do if Mitch McConnell blocked their nominee for Supreme Court Justice? What they should have said, well, I'll just put in an acting Supreme Court Justice. But with my two picks, I like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren.
Mm-hmm. And if neither of them make the cut, do you have a third?
I really like Andrew Yang and Marianne Williams.
Cool. Okay. They both have some really remarkable things to say that I think are adding importantly to the discourse, and I think either one of them would make a great president as well. Ed, thank you for the call. Bob in Chuckney, Tennessee. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom.
Hey, Bob.
During the debates, Bernie said that the federal judges could be rotated, and I was just wondering about that.
Sure. The Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, Article 3 deals with the courts, and Article 3, Section 2 says that the Supreme Court shall be subject to regulation by Congress. And what historically that has meant is that Congress, legislatively, they pass a law to determine how many members of the Supreme Court there are. This was FDR's court packing scheme in 1937. He was going to pass a law that said that he wasn't going to change the total number of members of the court, but that any member of the court who was over 70, which was 5 out of 4 of them at that time, all of the 70-plus-year-olds would all become one vote, and then they would add a number of members of the court. In that case, it would have been they would have added 4 more members of the court to make up for, to bring it back up to 9 votes. What Bernie is saying is that if you read the Constitution carefully, just because somebody has been put on the Supreme Court doesn't mean that they're a Supreme Court justice for life. It simply means that they are a federal judge for life. So if a president wanted to move, say Neil Gorsuch, the stolen seat, right, off the Supreme Court and put a new person on the Supreme Court, you can't just say, Neil, you're fired. But what you can say is, Neil, you're now going to be on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
Rotate them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, I hope that, Bernie, I didn't recall that it was Bernie who suggested that specifically. I knew that suggestion was made. And if that was Bernie's suggestion, I hope that he can come on the program and talk about it, because I think it's a good idea. And I've got a book coming out about the Supreme Court in about 5 months, and that's one of the few things that's not in it. And I wish, this is like stuff happens so fast, but yeah, spot on. Bob, thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Joliet, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Thanks for coming to the Frugal Muse. That was great. And when you explain certain passages, and using your voice to emphasize, that was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I would recommend, or I would say, I think Bernie's the gold standard, and like the previous caller, he is the fire. But I like Elizabeth. Okay, and then I would say I like Tulsi because. previous caller said, but also, remember in 2016, she was fired or stepped down from her position in the DNC because she wanted to back Bernie, and Wasserman Schultz gave her, ultimatum. As I recall, I think I'm right.
She resigned her position on the Democratic National Committee because she felt that the DNC was favoring Hillary Clinton. Let's just say that broadly. I mean, I don't remember the specifics.
Exactly.
And that offended her.
She's a vet and everything, and I mean,
and that's a very principled position to take.
Yeah, I just applaud her, and nobody ever seems to remember that, but she had the courage of her convictions, and that shows great character, and I just really admire that. I mean, I was a reservist in the Vietnam era, and so that's called fidelity. Like when we get promotions and stuff,
right.
that would be on the certificate. Okay, and then I would like, let's see, I like Inslee because he's got the single-minded focus for, the climate
change.
Crisis. Yeah, I like Mary Ann because of her values and what she stands for. But I don't know. She doesn't have the political experience. So I don't know.
She ran for Congress in California and came within a whisker of
really?
being, and so she's been through a political campaign.
Oh, I didn't know.
So she understands politics pretty well.
I just love her. I mean, what she stands for is awesome. Yeah. Kamala troubles me a little bit because of her banking connections, that she didn't prosecute Mnuchin, and I don't know the details, but on the internet it says like she won't talk about it. Corey, I know just in the past he's backed. I like him, but he's backed corporations like pharmaceuticals.
Although he's now saying he won't take any more money from Big Pharma. So
well, that would be great. And then I think Bill de Blasio, boy, he really came through and seemed like he had some good, ideas and character. Plus, who he's married.
Can you imagine Bill? Yeah, he's married to an African American woman, and can you imagine Bill de Blasio and Donald Trump on the same stage?
No, that's exactly what I was thinking, because he would tower over him.
He'd rip his arms off. Yeah. I mean, he would just take Donald Trump apart.
Yeah, that's true too. Right? Remember how he tried to intimidate Hillary?
Yeah,
standing behind her and all that stuff on the stage.
De Blasio would turn around and punch him, or verbally. I mean, it's. Yeah, I'm with you, Dave. I want to get a couple more.
One more thing.
Sure. Yeah, quickly.
Can you back or promote or encourage people to watch documentaries? Like the brainwashing of my dad.
Yeah.
And like my Michael
Jen,
Moore stuff.
what's her name's? Yeah.
You were in it, but because I try to talk to people, my friends and family, and everybody's clueless. We're not, and if we can't get on the same page, how are we going to, make any change?
Yeah, I'm with you. Brainwashing of My Dad is a brilliant documentary.
Oh,
it's probably on Netflix right now, and everybody should watch it. Dave, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Rick in Baltimore. Hey, Rick, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Choices, Mayor Pete for the primary here in Maryland. Mm-hmm. I don't care who gets the nomination.
Yeah, vote blue no matter who.
I don't switch parties. I don't vote Republican at all.
Yeah, but we need we also need Rick. We need a candidate who's going to turn out the base. We need a candidate who's going to cause young people and boomers in particular. I mean, that seems to be the people in the middle are kind of the middle working class, and they're just not all that engaged. But we need a candidate who's going to excite people and get them turned out. That's what Obama did.
Yeah, I agree. Can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
I guess you and your wife are happy not to be in Washington come Thursday.
Yeah. And Trump wants tanks now on the National Mall.
All about him, and I won't.
Oh, it's crazy, Rick. I got to run, but it's crazy. And now Donald Trump says he wants tanks after he's, it's like. He's turned the 4th of July, the birthday of our nation, into a vanity project, and of course he's hustling. Hey, come and stay in the Trump Hotel. It's obscene. I don't have a better word for it than obscene. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, tell your friends about our program. Spread the good word. Get out there, get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.